The guy was filling bottles with water with his magic. He said it was a 999 bottle. He touched another one and said it was 1,000 bottles. Okay, today's party's over. He looked at his watch and said that it was good. It's only half morning. It went faster than he thought. The guy thought that distilled water is the most important ingredient in every porcelain processing. He went on to argue that water is also used in the preparation of living organisms. Its quality determines the quality of manufacture. The distilled water he makes is a special product of the highest quality, evenly mixed with magical power. The guy closed his watch and said that this allowed him to spend time after lunch studying materials. A man ran into the room and shouted that he was greeting the Rasta Master. The guy turned and saw a man. Rust said it was Master Lehailsam. He asked him how he could help him, and also why he had come here. Lehailsam is an alchemist from the blacksmithing section. Lehailsam smiled angrily and said he didn't know what to say. That's why the people in the basic research department. The man abruptly stopped and said it didn't matter. The head of the association wants to see him. Rust looked at him in surprise and wondered what could have happened. Lehailsam quickly began to leave. The guy thought that Lehailsam was usually connected to him in some way. Rust went on to argue that he has always been committed to accounting for the budget of the Department of Basic Research in which he works, and Lehailsam is in the Department of Blacksmithing for the manufacture of armor, which is the most profitable business. Rust excitedly wondered what Lehailsam's reason for being in a good mood was. The man grabbed a box of water and said that he was going to buy distilled water. He shouted that the maids should just sit and mind their own business. Rust went to the office of the head of the association. The guy didn't know what to expect. He went into the office and the head threw a sheet at him. The man said that the Department of Basic Research is having its budget cut. Rust took the papers in surprise. The guy shouted in shock that there was no budget. Rust said that the Basic Research Department always helps other departments. They have achieved nothing. The head said that, of course. Then the budget would be distributed among the most profitable departments. Rust said that's the whole point. They can do something. The head interrupted him and shouted that it was enough. The Fundamental Research Department has now been disbanded. All they have to do is join other departments. The head added that he was sure he would be grateful to him for not firing him yet. When they knew what to do, he could return to fitness classes. Rust thought angrily that it was ridiculous to even argue with him. They would not have been able to make tubes for these devices without the Department of Basic Research. The guy grabbed the papers and quickly headed away. Rust thought that this was the result of joint research by the department, Basic Research, and the Formula Development Department. All the solutions and substrates necessary for the preparation were provided by the Department of Fundamental Research. Rust sighed heavily and thought that only the prejudices of the head of the association and other people who do not understand this field give the impression that the Fundamental Research section has achieved nothing. The guy went into his office and sat down on the chair. He looked at the ceiling and thought that the number of employees who had decreased since taking office as the head of the association was very large. But he still managed to work for them. Rust went on to argue that they are proud that no development has been successful without their Department of Basic Sciences. All of them require the highest quality materials. The guy thought wearily that he had prepared everything. Rust said that budget cuts and the reduction of the Department of Basic Research. He is sure that he will not be able to say anything to the current chairman. Rust heard a sound from the information and communication equipment. The guy asked with interest who the message was from. Rust looked at the typewriter that was typing the letter. This is the height of perfection in modern metalworking. Rust said he thought their department had created the basic materials for that too. The guy took the letter in his hands. Rust happily said that it was from Karen. There will be a graduation at school. They were like comrades, and strangely enough, they were on the same wavelength. The girl writes that it's amazing, and in this regard she has an offer for him. When they were young, they ruined the classroom. They turned it into a jungle. The professor made me write a lot of apologies. Rust said it wasn't a very smart move. The guy thought that she had participated in the war on the border. Rust said what had happened. Karen writes that she is sure Rust thinks she is being rude in her importunity, but she is going to tell him the truth. Rust read that Karen was given a fiefdom on the border. He is being asked to help develop their territory. The guy thought that there were two paths in front of him now. He began to reason that, firstly, he sees a future in which he spends the rest of his life doing only housework. The other is a parchment with a future in which anything can happen. Rust looked out the window and asked if he should quit. The guy thought that they would have fun together with Karen again. If it was the former president of the association, it would be a great job. He had feelings for him. In particular, the former president of the association, O. Howhammer, is a person who has been trained and understood the importance of fundamental research. Rust touched the books and thought that they had developed many of the recipes together. Luzuto and other members of the fundamental research section are the heart and soul of the association. The guy grabbed his backpack and left the office. He thought that after the political turmoil, Master Hariyama had been transferred to another service. He was replaced by the head of the cooperative a former official. The guy stopped in front of the head's office. Lee Halsam and the head were discussing something. Rust wanted to knock, but decided to listen to their conversation for a while. Lee Halsam put something on the table and said that this was all the information on the gunsmith's page. The head said that it was true. He will send all the money to the armor development department. Lee Halsam shouted joyfully that he was very grateful to him. He knows how to create an employment agency. The head told him to continue working on samples from the arsenal. Rust thought angrily that they should at least speak a little quieter. The guy knocked on the door. He did not wait for permission and went in himself. The head shouted angrily that he could not come here. He can't just walk in here. Rust put the letter resignation on the table. The guy looked into the eyes of the head and confidently said that he was quitting. The head asked in shock what he had just said. Rust did not listen to them and headed for the exit. Lee Halsam loudly asked the guy why he was trying to quit on his own. The head shouted that Rust could not leave. The guy stopped and handed them the papers. He said without emotion that he could quit if he wanted to. The head and Lee Halsam began to read through the documents. Suddenly, their faces changed. They were scared. Rust said that his employment contract only concerns the Department of Basic Research. The guy went on to say that thanks to someone else, it so happened that the Fundamental Research section was disbanded. This means that you can leave your job at this organization on the same day. Rust waved at them and was about to leave. Lee Halsam angrily asked what would happen to the household chores, as well as who would make distilled water for. The guy looked at him and replied that he had to cook it himself. First of all, this is not a contract job. He's also a necromancer, especially since it's very simple. The head wearily said that he should already go. Master Lee Halsam said he could do without him. The head looked at Lee Halsam and asked if it was true. The man hesitantly replied that yes, of course. The head of the association said that he did not need people who could not even understand how warmly the association felt about the desire to hire them, even if only as handymen. The eyes screamed at him to get out of here. Rust replied that he didn't need his kindness. See you later. The guy left the office and slammed the door loudly. Rust was walking down the corridor. Suddenly, he stopped in front of the painting. A large dragon is painted on it, which pulls its head towards a person. The mysterious man holds out his hands to him. Rust sadly thought that this was the last time he would see this painting. The guy said he was grateful for the support. He walked out the door and left the association. Rust went outside the city and shouted joyfully that he was resigning. He's in a very good mood. He just finished canceling the lease on his apartment. The guy took out a scroll and asked that they continue on their way to Karen. He said loudly that deployment, manifestation, behemoth. Rust touched the scroll, which shone. The behemoth Kumastavok appeared. Rust smiled and climbed on his back. He shouted loudly for him to go ahead. The animal quickly ran to the border. Rust thought that the inhabited territory of Kali Lung was located on the northern outskirts of the country. He contacted Kali Lung to let her know that he would be looking after her. She told Rust that they were waiting for him with open arms. The guy thought warily that she was overreacting. He doesn't think he can do anything about it. Rust continued his journey on the behemoth. They went into the forest. The guy said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Rust began to carefully examine nature. He thought that he had come to this paradise before to collect materials. There are flowers everywhere. A pleasant breeze, the aroma of new shoots is amazing. Rust said that he had some free time, so he's going to start collecting. He hopes that there are still some settlements near the lake. The behemoth started waving its head and tail. Suddenly, he ran forward. Rust was surprised to think that these were signals that something was wrong. Something bad had happened. Rust told Behemoth that he had to be careful. The guy thought that the wooden crackers on the alarm system might belong to His Majesty. Rust noticed a girl lying unconscious on the ground in front of him. The guy jumped off the behemoth and shouted for him to be on his guard. He looked around carefully. Rust thought that if a person is on the road, he may fall into a trap where people pose as foreigners. The chances of this happening in such a place are negligible. Rust looked at the girl and said that she belonged to a rare species, Knight's Priests. The guy crouched down and touched her. He wanted to make sure she was okay. Rust said that he was almost sure that this was the form of the priest of the community of the goddess of revenge. He touched her skin and thought she had a high fever. The guy said he thought she was unconscious. Rust said there was an antipyretic herb on the way. Did she know about it? The guy turned her over and said that he needed to clear her airways and check her condition. He apologized for touching her. Rust looked at the girl's face in shock. She was burning all over. She was very ill. The guy thought angrily that this was compression. It couldn't have been worse. He had to save her. Rust unfolded the scroll, which magically covered the girl. The guy talked him into starting the creation. The scroll began to read information from the girl. The guy thought that it looked like she had a really high fever, and she also had a very low level of health. So hard times have come for the alchemist. Rust said it might not have been easy for her. He carefully read the information on the scroll and thought that he had finally found the cause of the fever. Rust said that she had severe wounds on her side. Everything was clear to him now. This is a special type of poison called a familiar. He thought that his potions were not suitable for healing. The guy looked at the plants that grow in the forest. Rust said that means we need to make a new healing potion. He went in search of suitable herbs. He shouted to the behemoth to guard the girl. Rust ran into the thicket of the forest, but soon stopped. He began to breathe heavily, but could not catch his breath after running. Rust wiped the sweat from his forehead and thought that he shouldn't have skipped his daily exercises. That's it. From now on, he needs to start training. Otherwise, it's not the case. The guy said he would drink the drink and start breathing again. Rust quickly emptied the bottle of potion. He looked ahead and saw a small lake with grass growing around it. He shouted joyfully that it was great. That's what he was looking for. Rust thought that it was obvious that the grasses were gradually decreasing. The guy said that someone comes for them regularly. Rust began sorting through the herbs. He said that these increase the regeneration of the body, and these increase the regeneration of injured parts. This is for the elimination of toxins. Rust chose the last plant. He thought that an ordinary plant has little effect on the body. But when the plant turns into a potion, the effectiveness changes. He smiled and thought that if it had happened much earlier, it would have been difficult to prevent this poison. He is sure that he will be able to make a potion. He looked at the water and said that his brother had once been in a similar condition. Rust decided to start creating a cure. He summoned the scroll again and began to make medicine. Rust said that creation, liberation, gravitational yoke, 5 objects that are necessary. And now the cleansing. A huge drop of water appeared. Rust thought that whenever he made a potion, he always had aromax. Because he didn't want to mess with them, he had to prepare them in advance. The guy said that he has a huge problem and that he creates everything. This water is like a concept. She becomes what she is. There are several tricks to create the perfect concept. Rust went on to say that he would read 1,000 books a day, create 1,000 bottles of potions a day. He has a new training to create the purest potion. The guy smiled and thought that the purest liquid has the greatest ability to restore the body. Rust began to combine the ingredients for the potion. When this ideal pure water is combined with medicinal herbs, it turns out the perfect balance of components. The water should turn out in violet color. Rust touched the drop and said it was cleansing. The potions are now ready. He thought that this was the whole process of creating a potion. For the sake of that girl with the wound who is now unconscious, the guy made the medicine fill the bottle so that it would be more convenient to give it to the girl. Rust smiled and said that it was very good. Now he has to go back. Rust returned to the girl. He looked in surprise at the behemoth that was stomping on the ground. The beast started jumping and shaking its head. He didn't like something, or he was just messing around. The guy wondered what he was doing now. The behemoth began to jump and trample the ground even more furiously. Rust hesitantly thought that he was just trampling the ground now. What had happened to him? Rust ran up to him and excitedly asked him if he was okay. What had happened during his absence? The hippopotamus raised its paw and waved its head for the guy to come up to him. There was a behemoth print on the ground, which had a black spot in it. Rust said in surprise that it was a familiar. He told the behemoth to hold on and not let go of him. He touched the strange liquid and said that it appeared at this time very strangely. Rust thought it was likely that he was following her, which was why he was here. Rust approached the girl and said that he was sorry. He poured the medicine on her and thought that first of all he needed to help her. This was his main task. The last drops fell on the girl's face. The wounds on her body began to disappear. The girl began to move and come to her senses. She started talking a little bit. She asked what happened. Suddenly her eyes widened, and she stood up abruptly. She jumped away from Rust and got into a fighting stance to protect herself. She hesitantly asked the guy that he was her enemy. Rust didn't expect her to react like this when she woke up. He thought she would thank him, and they would part ways. Rust pointed his finger at the footprint of the hippopotamus. He said that if she was talking about the one who was stalking her, then he was there. The girl stared at him for a few seconds. She didn't dare turn her head and let the guy out of her sight. The girl decided to take this step anyway. She turned her head and saw that there really was a creature that was watching her. The girl grabbed her sword and asked Rust who he was. The guy said that he was from the association. He stopped and said that, no, it wasn't like that anymore. Rust told her that he was an itinerant alchemist and had no money. He awkwardly thought that he was going to say something about the association. He still has this habit, even though he is no longer in the association. Now he is unemployed. The girl came closer to him and asked loudly that he was engaged in alchemy. Rust started waving his arms in surprise. He said she shouldn't scream like that. Rust told her that he was very sorry, but he healed her wound without permission. However, the poison in the body has not yet been completely purified. That's the way it is. He didn't do anything else. He handed her a flask of potion. The girl studied it carefully. She bowed and said that he had helped her. She is very grateful to him for the medicine. Rust smiled and looked at her. The girl excitedly asked what she owed him in exchange for his help. She was ready to do anything to thank him. Rust scratched his head and awkwardly thought that she had misunderstood him. He didn't want any gratitude from her. She probably thinks that he has not completely cured her and believes that she should pay him money for a complete cure. Rust hesitantly said that he had no evil intentions, so she shouldn't think anything like that. She doesn't owe him anything for his help. The guy took out a potion and pointed at it with his finger. He said that he just thought it would be better if she was conscious enough to drink the potion on her own. The girl smiled broadly and said that he did not need to apologize. She's the one asking for forgiveness for always being on the lookout. That's why she asked what he wanted. Rust blushed at the beauty of the girl. He smiled back at her, because they had settled the misunderstanding. The girl said that, apparently, he really had good intentions. The girl looked at the bottle and said that apparently his potions were really quite good. They definitely can't be free. The girl sounded very confident. The guy looked at her in surprise and then smiled broadly. He took out a bag of medicines. Rust said that if she really thought that, then they could make a deal. Rust put his hand on his chest and confidently said that he was a wandering alchemist. He's in the service of Karen, the lady of the northern border. Rust went on to say that if he had any problem in the future, she would borrow the power of her sword. The guy waved his hand and smiled broadly at the girl. He looked at the girl and asked her what her name was. Rust took out a bottle of potion and said with a smile that she would owe him. The girl smiled back at him. She handed him a sword and told him that she was the goddess of revenge, Tara, one of the three Knights' swords. He needs to remember that name well. She is the one who dispels evil. Tara stared into his eyes and added that she was doing all this with her sword. Rust smiled and thought awkwardly that she seemed to love herself very much. The guy handed her a bottle of potion and said that she could take it. Tara picked it up and drank it. She sighed in surprise and looked at her hands. She said in shock that she felt warm. Tara touched her cheeks. She took out her sword and looked into it to see her reflection and check her guess. Tara looked at her face in disbelief. She started crying. She happily said that her curse was gone. Russ looked away. He was embarrassed that he saw a crying girl. Tara couldn't stop her tears. She said it was a curse that no amount of holy water could remove. Russ thought that this was an additional effect of the potion that lifted the curse. The guy continued to argue that the potion is absolutely pure water. In other words, it's a divine potion. Therefore, it is more effective than holy water. Russ smiled because the girl was so happy. He climbed on top of the behemoth and thought that removing the curse was a bonus. If she lets him, he has something for her. The behemoth ran forward. Rust shouted at Tora to wait a bit, just 1 minute. The girl tried to grab him, but she couldn't do anything. She excitedly shouted for him to stop. Rust wasn't listening to her. He already knew what he needed to do. The guy thought about where he could find what he needed now. Tara looked at the bottle carefully and said that she had found a potion in gold. This is the legendary elixir. She will be in great debt to Rust for the rest of her life. She picked up the bottle and looked at it under the sunlight. Tara said it was very funny how great this man was who saved her from the curse. Tara said her hands were buzzing. He told her it was on the northern border. The girl turned and began to leave the forest, saying that she would first take revenge, and then also go north. Tara and Rust were moving further away from each other. In all moments, love is the reason for the existence of this world. Not many people know the truth of this world to tell it to everyone. Night fell. The behemoth stopped, and Rust got off it. He stroked the beast and said that they would make a halt here. The stars are brighter than usual today. It's amazing. Rust built a fire and thought that after parting with Tara, he decided to go straight north. Contemplating the starry sky, warming up by a makeshift campfire, helps to put your thoughts in order. The guy said that, come to think of it, he hadn't had such a night in a long time. In the association, he did what he explored all night long until dawn, and now he's in the woods. Rust unfolded the map and said that, for sure, there should be another village in front of the northern border. They should reach it soon. The guy took a bite of the candy bar. The behemoth climbed up to him to steal some for himself. Rust told him it wasn't his food. The guy thought that his whole journey would be accompanied by such food. He continued to reason that it was a bar made of various dried grains and fruits. His invention, accidentally made during old research. Karen gave him a very strange name. What did she call him? Rust remembered that the girl had named a candy bar. A grass brick. That's right, that's what she called him. The guy took a bite and said that he actually didn't taste so bad. The guy raised his head and looked at the stars. Rust said that it would be necessary to arrive in the village by tomorrow evening. He decided it was time to go to bed. The next day came. Suddenly, they stopped. Rust got off him and took out a map. He carefully studied the place they were in. Rust said in surprise that he was wondering why the behemoth had stopped here. Really, they were at the village of Tom. The guy walked into a town that looked abandoned. The guy hesitantly said that, in theory, this should be the village that Karen was talking about, but is it for sure? He had expected that the city would not be so empty. Rust stroked the behemoth and said with a smile that since they had come, it was worth looking around. Help was no longer needed. He is very grateful for everything he has done. The guy started doing magic. He said it was time for him to return. He rolled up a magic scroll and said that they would see each other soon and would travel again. Rust said that now he can go about his business. He was interrupted by a man who asked who he was. The guy looked at him in surprise and said that he hadn't noticed him. Rust went on to say that he was a wandering alchemist, and his name was Rust. He came too. The man interrupted him and shouted in shock that he said he was an alchemist. The man asked Rasta that he didn't want to go to their headman and say hello to him. Rust thought about the answer for a few minutes, but eventually said that he agreed. As they walked through the city, Rust carefully examined everything. He saw old shops, abandoned houses, abandoned and neglected wells. Everything looked very old. Rust thought it was really quite empty. It seems that there are no more people in some houses, and there are more such houses. The man stopped at a large and beautiful house. The guy looked around and saw dried herbs. He thought that there were twigs hanging at the entrance, which probably means that this is the headman's house. Recently disrupted, apparently, at least some activity in his village. The man knocked on the door and shouted to the headman that he had brought an alchemist. An old man with a cane came out of the house. He asked that this was a real alchemist. The man replied that, no, he had not checked it yet, but he really looked like an alchemist. Rust took out a medallion on which was painted a tree and scales with the moon and the sun. Rust smiled and said hello. He said his name was Rust, and he was a wandering alchemist. This is the alchemist's medallion. He thinks it will become a guided confirmation. The man bent down to examine the locket carefully. He said in surprise that he was sorry for the tactlessness, but he wanted to clarify something. The old man said that he represents this village as the headman. Indeed, only real alchemists have such medallions. But his, if his memory does not change, is as high as possible, right? Rust looked at the medallion and thought that the medallions were an alchemist's dignity, confirming his identity and rank. He didn't pay much attention to it. That's right, if you remember, this is a medallion of the first rank. He went on to argue that the Alchemists Association was divided by rank, although more than half of the people had the maximum rank. Even the Lihaos of the first rank. Rust decided that his former association was, after all, one of the best in the country, so there's not much to hide. The guy smiled and told the headman that yes, it was true. He was an alchemist of the highest rank. The headman pointed to his house and said that he asked to forgive his subordinate for disrespect. He asked him to come in and have tea. In fact, he has a request for Master Rust. Rust thought that most likely the reason for the empty houses in the village was various kinds of services. In addition, the fact that they show proper treatment to alchemists of the highest rank indicates that the people here are educated. The guy told the headman that he thanked him for the invitation. They entered the house and sat down at the table. A woman who was serving tea came up to them. She said that she apologized for the fact that the tea was not of the highest grade. Russ thought that he was not of the conversation would go without problems. He smiled at the woman and said that he was grateful for that. He held the mug to his nose and smiled happily when he smelled the aroma. He happily thought that after eating only bars and tea made from ordinary leaves, such warm tea seemed very tasty. The headman said that he would ask directly. The man asked Rust if he had any stored magic stones of the old type. Rust asked in surprise that he wanted to get the old type of stones. The guy put the mug on the table and said that his answer would depend on the details of the request. Rust asked the headman why he needed such old-type stones. The man smiled and asked Rust what he must know about the reform of all magic weapons signed last year. The guy said that yes, he remembers something. Rust thought that it seemed that last year Liedhelsum from the blacksmithing department bragged for a week, saying something similar to, "This is a weapon of my handiwork," and laughed. He said that this weapon would raise his authority. The man who met Rasta angrily said that this reform was a reform of one name from outdated to newest. His weapons became just ordinary sticks that couldn't do anything. The headman told Czar to keep his manners, but in truth, his words were quite accurate. The old man asked Zara if he could bring them. Czar shook his head in agreement. Rust asked the headman if he could tell him in more detail. The man put 2 pistols on the table, which were not much different. The headman pointed out to the simpler weapon that it was an old-style model. Then he looked at the weapon with the decoration and said that it was a new type of magic. The headman said that magic weapons in themselves were an essential tool for people who did not have deep knowledge of weapons. At least that was the case before the reform. Everything has changed since that moment. The headman said that the old model is sound and extremely economical in maintenance, and as for fuel, the magic stone, it is necessary to change quite rarely. An inherently excellent unit. He went on to say that he is an ideal friend for people living on the border. The H32 model, created several years ago, is especially good. The Immortal model has become a favorite for many would trust her with their lives. Rust took up arms and thought, when he first got into the association, he was just developing this model. The head of the blacksmithing department at that time was Master Halamer. They just created this model. With such a weapon, a soldier will die only of old age. Although this economical and really powerful model was called unremarkable junk by experts at the time. Russ smiled and thought that from the point of view of ordinary users, she was beautiful. The guy said that he did not expect anything less from Master Halamer. The guy said that in comparison with this weapon by God, the newest model RO01, Czar interrupted him and angrily said that this was complete nonsense. It could not have been worse than a weapon. The headman told him to keep his manners. The old man looked at Rust and said that his words were quite accurate. Although the power increased slightly, the weapon fell apart after a dozen shots. The headman continued to say that it had become even worse. It was the need for fuel. You can charge the ROs in one only with the same latest magic stones, which are already worth a lot, so they are not enough for a long time. Czar said that the outdated model actually had enough power. The headman said that he agreed, but, unfortunately, the production of outdated models had stopped. as well as the magic stones for them. The headman said that although the magic weapons of the old models still function well, but without magic stones, they are useless. Czar said they had no choice but to buy these new guns, but they were of zero use. Anyway, it costs a tidy sum to feed them. He went on to say that because of this, they had to save money and forgive the vandalism of monsters. But even if they did not save, it happened that the weapons simply exploded or broke. Zaire added that as a result, the damage caused by beasts and monsters has increased many times. The headman said that people began to be afraid. In particular, the breadwinners of their families. Rust interrupted him and said that they were eventually forced to move to calmer lands. He understands correctly. Now he understands why they need old stones. The headman joyfully asked what it meant that he would give them stones. Rust scratched his head and awkwardly replied that he didn't. He simply doesn't have them. Czar and the headman looked at him in frustration. Rust told them with a smile that he would make them himself. Czar and the headman looked at him in shock. The old man said it was just fine. Czar shouted that, no, he thinks it's cool. Rust was surprised to think that he had said something amazing. He told them that he thought they understood that his service would not be free. They said in horror that they understood. Rust said that he needed access to the resources of their forest, of course, within reason. He asked them what they thought about it. Czar and the headman looked at each other in surprise. Czar asked Rust that this was all he wanted. There are many trees of the genus Kageli growing in their forest, but where it can be applied. Rust said that there are a lot of them here. It's wonderful. Rust thought that this was expected from people who had no knowledge of alchemy. But lately, it has become less and more difficult for settlers to plant kagel in villages. Rust continued to argue that he had read old folk literature. He remembers that he had read that at least one kageli tree should grow in every village. They went outside. The residents came up to them, and the headman said that they would be happy to fulfill his request. Then, if he doesn't mind, they'll take him to the kagel grove. Rust looked at the people and awkwardly thought that the village was small, and there was not much entertainment. It was worth expecting a crowd to gather. If you look closely, there are not enough children. They reached the kagel grove. Rust looked around and said that it was a magnificent forest. He turned to the people and asked if they didn't mind. Could you help me collect some materials that have fallen from the kagels? The headman told the residents that since they all came here, then be kind enough to work. They must help to collect the branches and fruits of the kageli and bring them here. People completed the receipt very quickly. Rust said he was very grateful for the help. That would be enough. The guy picked up the kagel fruit and said that everything turned out fine. Rust asked people that they most likely know the ingredients of magic stones. He said that firstly, to create a processed magic stone, you need a monster magic stone. The guy went on to say that it doesn't stop there. Rust summoned several scrolls and spoke the word creation. The guy asked what he was doing. He was told that it was a scroll. It is said that alchemists use special secrets of art. Someone shouted that he was using 3 creation abilities at the same time. It's an amazing sight. Rust heard them talking, but he didn't say anything. Rust thought that there were a lot of people who didn't know anything about alchemy. He thought to show them the way he creates, but for now, it's just a small matter. The guy spoke the word purification loudly. Everything sparkled and shone. Rust thought with a smile that maybe now it's worth bragging about his special method of creation. He uses a monster to create a stone from magic particles in the air. The guy continued to reason that the stones that are usually obtained from monsters do not appear out of nowhere. Such stones crystallize in the bodies of monsters for a very long time from magical particles in the atmosphere. Rust thought that in this way, stones could be created by filtering the air, extracting magical particles from it, and then crystallizing these particles. By creating stones based on this principle, you can avoid unnecessary costs in an attempt to hunt monsters. A black fog appeared. Rust thought that these were just magic particles, moreover, of high density. People shouted in surprise and began to whisper. Rust thought that people probably didn't understand what was going on here. At least they recognized his cleansing scroll, his special technique. Thus, only he in the entire universe can create stones, so it is not surprising that they do not understand what is happening here. Rust went on to speculate that although the method by which he creates the stone is now, it is very important and valuable. The guy threw a kageli fruit into the black fog, and it began to transform. Rust thought that the kageli fruit is often used in a variety of recipes as one of the ingredients. Using the kagel, he will be able to make a vessel out of it for the crystallization of magical particles. The guy knelt down and spoke to start polishing. A strong wind has risen. Someone shouted loudly that, "Wow, it's a small wind funnel." He was told that it was called a tornado. Rust smiled and thought that he hoped that the creation of the stone did not look too difficult. He hadn't expected such a reaction. Rust began to throw kageli fruits into the funnel. He said that he was now starting to put magic particles into the kageli fruit to shape the magic particles. Rust thought that in order to complete the final touch to create a high-quality stone, something else is needed. Namely, its cutting. The polishing scroll doesn't just create a mini tornado. All the efficiency is in the diamond dust in this tornado. By changing the density of diamond dust in the tornado and the speed of their whirling, you can make a cut into the flesh to the smallest detail. Russ reached out his hand and thought that it was probably about time. It begins to increase the density of diamond dust. The tornado began to grow even bigger and sparkle. The girls said admiringly that it was very beautiful. Russ looked at them and awkwardly thought, wherever he did it, all women react to shiny things the same way. When evaluating magic stones, there are 3 parameters by which their quality is assessed. In particular, the size and strength of the stone play an important role. If they do not harmonize with each other, then the magic stone will not work. In the end, the power of the stone is determined by the quality of the cut. Fortunately, Russ remembers exactly the proportions of the old type of stone. He thought that now, so that it would not turn out too small, he needed to fix a little here, too. Rust created the scroll once more and spoke loudly for the formation to begin. He thought that it seemed to be ready. Now he will finish the finishing touches and sealing the particles in the kageli fruit. Rust looked at his hand with a smile and saw the magic stone. Rust squeezed it in his hand and said that it was ready. He happily thought that there was. It turned out better than he expected. People looked at him in surprise. They couldn't believe that he had created a magic stone. Rust handed the headman a weapon. He asked if he would do the honor to try this. Age 32. The headman hesitantly said that, yes, of course. The old man took the weapon in fear. People were watching him intently. He inserted a magic stone into the weapon. The headman raised his pistol and fired into the air. There was a loud shot. People shouted joyfully that the stone was working. Now you can live without fear. Rust smiled and looked at the happy people. He thought that when you see such happy faces, you realize that all your efforts were not in vain. The guy said he would do a little more. He called for the scrolls and loudly told the creation to begin. Simultaneous promotion, 3 sets. People were watching him with their mouths open. Baskets of magic stones appeared in front of Rust. The guy wiped the sweat from his forehead and happily said that it would be enough. People opened their mouths in surprise, but couldn't say anything. Rust closed his eyes and thought that even for someone like him, the whole process took about an hour. He's going to teach people how to create stones themselves. Rust looked at the magic stones and told the people that, well, it all belongs to them now. Each of the stones is filled to the brim with magical particles. The guy added that his stones are also twice as capacious as the old type stones he supplied in the past. The headman asked in shock that they were really twice as powerful. The old man went up to the stones and said that there were as many as 5 baskets of them. One of their villages will not be able to use everything in a lifetime. He will need to consult with the Lord. Russ looked at him in surprise at the old man. The elder cleared his throat and said that in his entire long life, it's the first time he's been so surprised. The old man added that he had not even suspected such a result. He was a little worried. He looked at Czar and said that then they would take the stones to the village. Czar will prepare everything. The man joyfully ran up with a cart and said that he was already starting. Rust looked at the bags into which the magic stones had been transferred. There were a lot of them. The guy thought it was great that people quickly distributed their cases between each other. It's time to move on to the setting for discussing their future conversation. The headman said that he would send people who were standing empty-handed to help collect materials. Rust waved his hand and said that everything was fine. Since he had started the work, he would finish it himself. Rust called for the scroll and thought that they even volunteered to help him with the materials. He is very grateful to them for their initiative. He spoke loudly to start polishing and releasing. The wind picked up, which began to collect materials and put them in a bag. Rust thought with a smile that they no longer needed diamond dust. They will lower it completely to zero. He continued to argue that he had turned all the branches and fruits of Kageli into a tornado. He finished the finishing touch, put everything in the bags. The man shouted loudly that it was cool. Someone discussed that Rust cleared everything in just a second. He's obviously a master of his craft. Rust thought with a smile that the audience was quite lively today. The headman watched Rust's magic in shock. The guy asked him if they could move to some other place to talk. The headman replied loudly that yes, of course. The old man said that then they would come back. He looked at Czar and said he was leaving the rest to him. The man said loudly that he would do everything. Rust exhaled and thought that the headman understood his words from the floor. He never ceases to be surprised by this village. Everyone understands each other perfectly. With such a relationship, they will be fine. They returned to the headman's house. Rust was served tea again. The guy thought with a smile that tea tasted especially great after work. The feeling of completion from work after looking at how other people sincerely enjoy it is noticeably different. Rust said that he was ready to start a conversation. The old man confidently said that he was all ears. Rust smiled and thought that, really, he looks so scary. Why is he so nervous? The headman thinks that he is going to talk about something bad. Rust smiled and told the old man to relax. The next conversation won't be about what he's thinking. It will be about the old type of stones. If one village uses them, if only one village uses the reserves, then the reserves will most likely last for years. The old man asked in surprise that they would last for years. The headman said that he was downplaying his importance, considering the number of stones and their capacity. He went on to say that he could confidently say that there would be enough of them for the next few decades. He doesn't even know how to thank him for such generosity. Rust waved his hand for the headman to stop. He told him that he thought that it was not only their village that needed such stones at such a difficult time, especially the border areas. The headman replied that yes, it really is. Everyone living in these border areas is looking forward to the return of the old type of stones. Rust said exactly what. This is what their conversation will be about. The guy said he wanted to talk about the possibility of concluding an agreement on the supply of stones of the old type, on the new possessions of the knight Karen. The old man said in surprise that he had heard about the Karen knight from their lord. The old man said that they talk about her as a knight whose sword is capable of smashing 3 heavy infantrymen, about a girl thanks to whom recent wars have turned out to be victorious. The old man said that despite her thin, feminine hands, she's so strong that it is difficult to call her a human, so she was given a nickname. Rust raised his hand and asked the old man to stop. He thought that he had heard such praise about her hands many times. Such praise is unpleasant to hear when a girl is described as a monster with the power to chop a dragon. Rust told the elder that Karen was his girlfriend during his student days. He's on his way to her now. The old man waved his head and said that he was sorry for the rude words. Rust said that was why he would like him to personally talk to the local lord about this issue. The guy thought that he was sure that the development of Karen's new lands would cost a tidy sum. Rust began to reason that there would be a way to make money, and there should be no problems. Only if Karen refuses to entrust him with the leadership of this work. He is sure that Karen and the local lords will make a deal with a small job object. Rust said that the main thing is to lay the foundation for future relations. The guy thought that they had already provided the village with the magic stones they needed. It was his gift, which the headman was very happy about. Rust drank some tea. The elder waved his head and said that he was grateful for the help. It was really very beneficial for them. Rust said he would like to send a letter. The old man spoke loudly for Mr. Rust to bring paper and a pen. The guy thought there was something else. He needs a root canal. This letter will be addressed to another of his school friends besides Karen. Rust continued to argue that he should now serve in the army. This case concerns a conflict of interest regarding magical gems. He thinks Lee Hyla-sam might be involved in this. Rust remembered Lee Halsam's face and said that he didn't care about him. He thought he was more interested in the military. During the war, they switched to a new type of magic weapon. He went on to argue that, of course, military equipment also brings huge profits to the army. That's where the time comes, as soon as the flow of old Rasta magic stones begins. They will definitely want to crush them. Rust finished writing the letter and said that it was good. The elder asked what Rust wanted him to send him. He replied that he would be grateful for that. The guy thought he needed to think it through. Rust left a seal on the scroll with his medallion. He got up from his chair and said that it was time for him to go now. The elder told him to stop. He asked Rust if he could stay the night. The guy replied with a smile that it was really time for him to leave. He went outside. People started asking that he was already leaving. A woman came up to him with plates and said she thought he could make the dishes sparkle. The man said he wanted him to make his axe gold. Another man asked if he could mow down the weeds in his garden with a small tornado. Rust looked at them in surprise, but did everything. It's time to leave. He waved goodbye to everyone and left the city. He called the behemoth, and they set off. They finally reached the border. Rust, sitting on the behemoth, looked around and said that he did not expect to see this. It seems that the rumors are a bit false. Rust thought that there are no living plants and animals here. Exclusively only monsters. However, the wasteland is inhabited by creatures and plants that he has never seen before. He doesn't know if they're dangerous. Some kind of creature attacked them. The behemoth managed to step on him and crush him. Rust got down from him and stroked his head. He said he was grateful to him. The guy added that hippos are sensitive to hostility. It helped a lot. Rust examined the crushed creature and asked in surprise what it was. He said he needed to get it out of here. Rust took out collection gloves and waterproof cloth bags. The guy said it might be useful to them. Rust finished packing the strange creature. He exhaled wearily and said that this place was a wasteland because the monsters had displaced all other creatures. Wasn't that right? He looked at the bag and said with a smile, what if there were so many monsters that he had not seen before? It will be very interesting for him to study them. Rust unfolded the map and said that, judging by the map, they should soon see a watering hole. As soon as they pass it, they will be almost near Karina. They will meet soon. Rust climbed behind the behemoth, and they set off again. They reached the reservoir. The guy asked what it was all about. He patted the beasts and said they would rest for a while. Rust approached the water and asked with interest if there were monsters in the pond. The guy heard some sounds. He thought he should be on his guard. He looked at the water and saw black smoke. Rust was surprised to think that these were fluctuations in the magic element. But why were they here? Something jumped out of the water. It tried to hit Rust, but he managed to turn away. The guy looked at the ground and thought in surprise that it was a baby lizard. The beast looked harmless. Rust examined the lizard and thought it was a rather rare species. He heard strange noises and looked at the water. Tentacles began to come out of it. They started attacking Rasta. The guy started dodging. He wondered what was going on. The guy turned his head and was surprised to notice that the tentacles were hitting the lizard. He thought uncertainly that it was aiming at a lizard. The beast looked at the guy pityingly. He began to expect help from him. Rust looked into her eyes. The guy thought that no matter how much he looked like a defenseless child, he was still a monster. This appearance does not guarantee that this is a really harmless cub. Rust continued to watch the lizard being beaten by the tentacles. The guy thought that sometimes such techniques are just a way to blind the vigilance of the enemy. But in general, when it comes to fighting monsters, the strong always devours the weak. Such is the law of nature. The lizard looked pityingly into the guy's eyes again. Rust tried to resist, but soon gave up. He thought, okay, he feels too sorry for this beast. Rust shouted for Behemoth to help him. The magical beast mumbled loudly and jumped onto the tentacles. The lizard looked at the Behemoth in fear. He could easily crush her. The Behemoth stepped right on the tentacles and tore them apart. Some of the tentacles remained on the ground, and the other went under the water. Rust said he was grateful for his help. The guy took out his gloves and bags again. He touched the lizard, which showed no signs of life. Rust thought she wasn't reacting, but it didn't look like the beast was dead. Rust lifted part of the tentacle. He said it was disgusting. The guy thought that he wasn't sure if he needed to use a part of the tentacle as a consumable. The guy summoned a magic scroll that stretched over the lizard. Rust spoke to begin the deployment, decoding a manifestation. The scroll counted the information from the beast and returned to the guy. Rust looked at the notes on the scrolls and said that it was probably because animals were different from humans, so he couldn't read properly. The guy thought that no, that's not the point. The view is just blocked. Rust pointed at the scroll and happily said that he could already read it from here. He said it was clear to him now. The lizard is in the stage of complete exhaustion. Mitochondrial activity decreased to its maximum. although it is certainly difficult to judge his condition. The hippo decided to swim in the water. Rust noticed this and told him to be careful. The guy returned to the lizard, which also continued to be unconscious. Rust thought that it was simply impossible to brew an excellent potion quickly with the current state of this lizard. At this time, the behemoth began to fight with the tentacles. Rust was engrossed in his research, so he didn't notice anything. He thought that he couldn't determine what her condition was when she was normal. In such cases, it is better to limit yourself to safe potions. The hippopotamus came out of the water and approached the plant. There was a piece of tentacles in his teeth. Rust looked at him in surprise and said what he had done. It was that recent monster. Rust created a potion and dropped some on the lizard. He watched the beast closely, but nothing happened. The guy said, puzzled, that the lizard did not wake up. Rust looked at the scroll again and said that the level of mitochondrial activity had clearly increased. He has almost reached the usual human figure. The guy continued to argue that it turns out that his ultimate purpose is many times greater. The difference is quite significant. The behemoth lightly touched the lizard. Rust thought it was unusual for a hippo to be so friendly to some kind of monster, because he is so sensitive to hostility and malice. But isn't this lizard just one of those? The guy decided that in any case, if he just left everything as it is, he is not sure that she has a chance of salvation. He thought it was a watering hole in the middle of the wasteland, and there seemed to be quite a few monsters in the area. Besides, the disappearance of the tentacled monster might attract new ones here, so if you throw her in there unattended, she will definitely die. Rust looked at the behemoth and asked what they would bring this soap with them. They set off. The guy unfolded the map and began to think about what to do next. He said that he thought they should follow the river flowing from this watering hole. The behemoth stopped in front of a small settlement that was located in the steppe. Rust said it looked like it was him. Karen's camp, which they had been walking to for so long. The behemoth stopped and started making strange noises. The guy asked what it was. He climbed down from the behemoth and took out a medallion. The guy shouted loudly that his name was Rust. He is an alchemist of the master rank. He came here at the request of the knight Karen, so he asks to be accepted. The sand began to move, and girls appeared out of it, the faces hidden behind a cloth. They had spears in their hands to defend themselves from the enemies that were attacking their lands. Rust looked at them in surprise. One of the girls said they were glad to welcome him. There are monsters on the border that imitate people, so they asked for forgiveness for such reception. The guy thought it looked like this was what the hippo had warned him about. If they had come any closer, they would have entered their attack zone. Something bad could have happened. Rust smiled and told the girls that it was okay. They are quite adept at disguise. These cloth bandages on their eyes are created with the help of magic. He was told that they did not know how to act covertly, but despite what was being said about them, he still easily noticed them. Now it is clear why Mrs. Karen spoke so highly of him. The girl added that, by the way, these bandages are just a piece of cloth. Rust thought they had blue and red eye patterns on their headbands. Judging by their appearance, they are very similar to magic items. I wonder what they need them for. The girl noticed a lizard on the hippo's back. He screamed loudly that there was some kind of monster on the back of his mount. Her friend called her Roa and told her to calm down. The girl called her Ari and said that there was something strange. Ari asked her what she wanted to say, that they couldn't let Master Rust into them because of that she might want to fight Master Rust into them because of that she might want to fight Master Rust. Room hesitantly said that it was good. Ari looked at Rasa and said she was sorry for her sister. The guy replied that it was okay. Rust thought that he was glad that all this did not result in a useless battle. I would not like to get into trouble at the very beginning of a new job. Rust looked at Ari and thought that this girl seemed to have some special gift of vision. Her younger sister was probably watching their approach from afar. I wonder if she can read someone's abilities. Rust remembered the lizard and thought that, whatever it was, this white lizard was still a cause for concern. The guy put the locket away and smiled broadly. He told the girls that he understood them perfectly. Their concern is well-founded. As for this white lizard, he will take responsibility for it, as well as for this locket. The girl said that she thanked him for these generous words. Now he has to follow them. They will escort him to Mrs. Karen. She is waiting for him very much. They reached the tent. The girl waved her hand and told him to go inside. Rust went inside and said he was sorry for the trouble. There were people in the tent who were engaged in various developments. The man was telling his colleagues that they needed to send the papers as soon as possible. They shouted to him that they had received a response from point D. Another man said that the points A and G are silent. This is the 5th attempt. Rust examined everything carefully. He thought that there was communication equipment in front of him now. Everything is clear to him now. It turns out that this is their centralized information headquarters. A girl came out and shouted joyfully that Rust had finally arrived. The guy smiled at her. They shook hands in greeting. Karen said with a smile that they were waiting for him. She started waving her arms and said with a laugh that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl asked with a smile that he had aged since their last meeting. Rust exhaled and said wearily that this was irrelevant, so Ms. Karen should stop. The girl chuckled and said that it was still the same Rust. The guy said that despite the considerable remoteness of this area, it was quite easy to get here. Karen looked at Ari and Roa and asked if they had met him. Karen smiled broadly and asked the guy that he didn't have any problems. Rust looked at the girls, who quickly turned away. The guy was surprised to think that they went out to meet him. Rust understood what was going on. He thought that if there was a problem between him and this camp, these two should sort it out. It turns out that they took on the risk of further conflict already among their own, going to meet him. The guy scratched his head and thought that he did not have to follow Karen's lead and tell everything as it is. Rust told the girl that there were no problems. The girl smiled and said, "That's what it means. How? It is very good." She walked up to the magic machine and said that enough was enough empty talk. Rust has to come here. Karen turned her attention to her people and shouted loudly that they should take a short break. All the people looked at her in surprise but stopped their studies. The staff left the tent. Karen said that there was no table. Then she would make it herself. The girl magically removed the magic machines to free the boxes on which they stood. Rust looked at her and thought that she hadn't changed a bit. Karen happily said that it was great. It should do. The girl shouted for Roa and Ari to bring them tea. Karen sat down opposite Rust. The guy awkwardly asked why she had so diligently escorted everyone out, if there were any problems. She replied with a smile that this was what she expected from him. The girl added that he immediately got down to business without further ado. Rust smiled and gloatingly asked that he was right after all, that she wanted to get everyone out. Rust said that it was supposed to be the carefree life of the discoverer, a dimensional quiet life where the sun sets over a land devoid of any magic. Somehow it turned out that way. Karen said that's why it's so important to eliminate this very magic, because otherwise they will not see the sunrise of the harvest. But he does not think that she turned to him with such a simple task. The girl said that what he had to do, first of all, Master Rust, was the treatment of a local disease that was widespread in this camp. Karen added that she wanted to ask him to sort out the cause of the outbreak. We have prepared a tent for him. He can dispose of it entirely at his discretion. Rust replied that it was fine, he understood. The guy went outside and went with the hippo to the tent. The beast followed him closely so as not to get lost in an unknown place. The guy wondered what Karen meant by local disease. Does this mean that the symptoms began to manifest only after arriving at the camp, but before building theories? It is necessary to first assess how they manifest themselves. Suddenly, Rust felt the eyes of the local people on him. He smiled broadly and greeted him. The guy thought tensely that their looks were frightening. People didn't answer anything. They just started to disperse. Rust thought they were extremely wary. However, in addition to dealing with the disease, he should gain the trust of these people. The girls took him to the tent. Ari said it was Master Rust's tent. The guy smiled and looked at them. He thought that, come to think of it, it was undeniably good that he had the chance to meet them first. Roa said that she would not take her eyes off Master Rust. He will not be forgiven if he shames Mrs. Karen. Ari angrily told her to stop. Rust thought he was taking it back. The guy stroked the hippo and said that it helps that he has a tent for one person, although its size clearly exceeds his expectations. Someone shouted that they had a big shot. Rust thought it was a silent message to the rest of the camp. That seems to be a pretty accurate definition. Rust went into the room and looked around. The guy said that there was only no furniture here, only bare ground. Karen seems to know him very well. Well, before Ari and his sister bring the first patients here. Rust took out a scroll and said that he needed to prepare properly. Let the cleansing begin. He thought that if he treated the carpet with cleansing and put it on the floor, it would be fine. The guy continued to argue that the simple preparation of a floor protected from dust and moisture. Rust put the lizard on the blanket so that it would not get hurt when he was arranging the room. He said that she would stay here for the time being, although of course he has rarely used it in the last few days. He took out the magic materials and said that their time had come. Rust touched the scroll and spoke loudly to begin the unfolding and manifestation of the rose. A beautiful rose appeared next to the sleeping lizard. It is called the alchemical rose. He sat on his knees and thought that despite her appearance, she was actually no less useful than a hippopotamus. Rust told Rosa to, first of all, please strengthen the sleeping place of this cub properly. The rose, with the help of its thorny stem, wrapped itself around the bedspread on which the lizard was sleeping. It turned out to be a cage that protected her with the help of rose thorns. Rust told her he was thanking her. It turned out very well. Now it remains only to arrange everything here according to the usual camp environment. Unbeknownst to everyone, he began to speak the thoughts of setting up a camp in his head. First of all, he created a flooring for thermal insulation and provided air circulation. Then a bed frame, a chair, and a writing table, as well as a table for conducting their experiments. Rust created the rose during his student days. She helped him for field research and other needs, so he took her with him on all expeditions. Now it has become for him just a good memory from his past, when several guys, led by Karen, fell in with him, making themselves at home with him. Suddenly, a man unknown to him looked into the camp and said that they had brought a man who had contracted that disease and they could enter. Rust nodded that he agreed and thought that his new job on the spot had finally begun. Rust got to work and started seeing patients. He listened to all the complaints and symptoms, said he would make a suitable potion. I thought myself that it took a whole day for identification and treatment. Temporary measures must be taken first, but the main priority is healing. It will be good if we can find out the root cause and conduct research slowly. One of the patients reported that he had a feeling of numbness in his right arm since yesterday. Rust was surprised and said he understood, thinking that there is a possibility of paralysis. There was a risk of irreparable damage. He felt his hand and thought that everything could be more serious than he had imagined. It looked like there would be a speed fight for him and for his hand. After this patient, Ari shouted to Roa to escort the next patient. She was surprised at the speed. The day turned into evening and then into night. Roa entered the tent and said that this was the last patient for the day. She thought that Rust was examining them as quickly as he was doing it. He smiled and told her that he thanked her for her work. He was able to deal with the primary treatment of all the patients by the end of the day. But suddenly he was called by the last patient, who said that he was tired and partially numb in his arms and legs. Rust said that he understood, and now he will make a potion that will return the patient's body to normal. Rast will monitor the progress of the changes. Rast reads the individual characteristics of the condition of each patient and makes standard auxiliary potions for each patient, taking into account the past. That's all he's doing at the moment. This work is called symptomatic therapy. For her, it is necessary to establish the root cause of the problem as soon as possible. Rust handed the potion to the patient and told him to knock it out. But some patients can have irreversible consequences if they delayed starting treatment. The patient drank the potion and shouted that his hands were moving again. "Thank you, doctor." Rust replied that it was very good. Only he's not a doctor. He can't believe that even a typical potion can bring so much joy. He would not have been able to survive such an experience in the ranks of the association. Rust turned to Roa and thanked him for today. Roa said she was just doing her job. Rust smiled, and he handed Roa the potion. He said it was a fatigue potion. He and Ari could drink it together. Roa asked when he managed to make it. Rust replied that he had a couple of free minutes. Roa was embarrassed and said thank you, quickly running out of the tent. Rust thought that it seemed difficult for her to open up to someone. Therefore, he will have patience for this. He got distracted and said he had one more thing to do today. He needs to make an interim report for Karen. It is necessary to make notes made during the admission of patients. Rust took the scroll and began to write down a summary of the condition of the patients received during the decryption during the examinations, and the current conclusions about the probable root cause were also included in the summary. He put on his jacket and left the tent, taking, in fact, a summary related to the treatment. Speaking of reports, next time you need to remember to mention the topic of magic stones. Rust looked up from the report and looked at the sky, horrified that it was already so dark. Suddenly, two men called out to him, thanking him for helping them. One of the men said that he could not have imagined that Russ would be able to put everyone on their feet in half a day. As expected from Miss Karen's old friend, Russ thought that at noon after his arrival, he felt only sternly appraising stares. Rust raised his head and told them to take care of themselves. He approached the tent and introduced himself as an alchemist who had arrived with a progress report on the fight against the disease. Rust asked the guard to notify Miss Karen. The guard raised his head and told Rust to just come in already. Karen turned to the entrance and asked if something had happened, because it was too late. Rust said he was done with the initial treatment of the cases, handing out a brief report. Karen was surprised that he did it in just half a day, when Rust had time. She said that he was incredible as always. The report, of course, is very good. But it turns out that there was a possibility of irreversible injuries. Rust replied that it was even so. Karen said she was very grateful to Rust for saving her people. He was surprised that, even if expressed in so few words, this was true gratitude from Karen. Rust bowed and said he was just doing his job. Besides, from now on, he will work with everyone, side by side. Karen laughed and said he was right. She decided to change the subject by saying that she was going to have a snack. Therefore, he should also eat with her. He didn't eat anything, it's true. Karen will arrange snacks for two. Rust thought about it and replied that, indeed, he only supports himself with what he usually takes with him on the road, as well as in the intervals between examining patients. Karen laughed, because he was talking about his grass bricks. Does he still eat them? Can't Russ supply himself better? Stopping her laughter, she said she hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Karen wiped away a tear and abruptly put her finger on the report, about which she wanted to hear more about the details while they were waiting for food. Rust agreed and began to talk about the details. The next morning, during breakfast, Rust looked at the cage and made sure that the white lizard still hadn't woken up. Putting on his jacket, he went outside. Rust was very surprised to see that Ari and Roa were standing outside his tent. He turned around and said, "Good morning," thanking them for the delay until dark. How are they feeling? Roa said that it was good because of his efforts. Ari thanked Rust for the potion, and Roa told her that he had given it. There is no trace of their fatigue. The effect is simply amazing. He wished he could see their expressions. Maybe they were happy, it seemed. Ari and Roa said that Mrs. Karen told them to accompany him today. They also added that she also asked to show Rust the neighborhood and that he wanted to see it first. He thought about it. He said that if there was a place where all their food supplies were stored, then he would like to start with it. They said they realized that letting Rust follow them, but first he used the manifestation of the hippopotamus. A huge hippopotamus appeared in front of them. Rust thought his guides found the hippopo entertaining. They came to a food warehouse on the territory of Karen's camp. Ari and Roa said that their storeroom is located here, but, for now, they quickly go for the manager. Russ thought that the storeroom was a dugout. It was probably previously the lair of some kind of monster, which was converted and adapted for storing supplies. It is quite reasonable from the point of view of the consumption of building materials. Rust got down on one knee and asked the hippopotamus to let him know if he noticed anything. Opening the bag, Rust took out the deployment scroll. He pulled the biolocation pendulum out of it. It is necessary to measure the concentration of magical energy. Rust thought that the biolocation pendulum is a special tool for measuring magical energy. After all, the stronger the fluctuations, the greater the concentration of energy. He mentally thought that the information received by the pendulum was being transmitted to the scrolls of the decryption. Therefore, you need to start with the warehouse environment. Rust sat down and began to swing the pendulum. Rust thought that the earth here is literally permeated with particles of magic, so microorganisms are not able to survive in a soil so heavily saturated with magic. So the environment is quite sterile. He turned his head and saw that Ari and Roa were sniffing the ground like a hippopotamus. Rust was surprised and whispered that they were really helping him so much. After a while, he went to the mountain and touched it. Rust thought that there was a fairly high concentration of magical particles everywhere, but there was nothing suspicious about it. After all, when choosing a place to store food, not only the factors of coolness and darkness of the room are taken into account. This is how the arrangement of food storages in this way can bring maximum benefit. We can say that this is a standard practice. The guy imagined various foods in his head and suggested that given such a high level of magical particles, it might help them. After all, magic particles kill bacteria, which means that cooking becomes safe. It is difficult for him to imagine that certain microorganisms characteristic of this region could get into people's bodies through food. So maybe the reason lies in something. He continued that there was something left of the monster for whom this place was a lair earlier. Rust asked Roa if it was true that this cave was the home of some kind of monster. Rust continued to ask if she knew what kind of monster. After sniffing, Roa replied that it was most likely a bear's lair. He continued the questioning by saying what kind of bear it was. What properties did he possess? The stranger greeted Rasta. Ari said that she had brought the person in charge of the food supplies. The person in charge said that he was glad to meet and thank you very much for helping his brother. The person in charge said that his brother's limbs were numb and he was very depressed. But he was very grateful for Dr. Rust's help in eliminating this problem. What can he do for him? He will do his best. Rust thought that it looked like his brother was one of the people he had received yesterday. Turning his head to the person in charge, Rust said that it would be very cool. He asked if he could inspect the inside of the vault. The person in charge asked what he needed there. They went inside together. Rust swung the pendulum and searched for the items he needed. He realized that the meat that is stored is the meat of monster animals. Fruits and resources obtained from monsters of plant origin are processed extremely carefully. Rust was surprised that it was all pretty well preserved. In addition, he did not find any traces of poisoning or anything that could remain from the monster that lived here earlier. Rust turned to the person in charge, whose name was Ren, that he was very grateful. Now it is possible to close the vault. Ren wondered if that was all. Hippopo barked for Rust to come to him. Surprised by his friend's shout, he came up and asked what the hippopotamus had found here. When he received the answer, he thanked his friend. Ari added that it turns out that the cause of the outbreak of the disease is not related to this place. Rust pulled back and said that it was difficult to judge for sure yet. Rust continued that first of all they need to explore all the surrounding areas in a sequential order. Roa exclaimed where they would go next. Rust abruptly lifted the scroll up and pointed into the distance, saying that they would have this next in line. By this he meant a vessel for purifying drinking water. The man said that this water tank is designed for drinking and cooking. Since this is a limited resource, the council decided to distribute water in clear shares between all sites. Rust looked at the scroll and confirmed that it was so. The vessel does not look like some kind of outdated magical tool, but it copes with the cleaning task properly. He doesn't see any problems with any component parts of the device. Therefore, a numbness effect could be caused by some toxic substances that got into the body with water or food, which is why he decided to inspect the food supplies first. Rust grimaced and whispered that. Apparently, solving this problem would not be easy. Suddenly, Roa called out to him with an offer to take a break for a small lunch. She got too close to Rust, which scared him. He got scared and said it would be nice. Roa said that when Rust is absorbed in his thoughts, he does not hear what is being said to him at all. Rust grimaced and thought that there was no arguing with that, but it's still quite unusual to receive an invitation to lunch from these two. He came out of his thoughts and told them that he understood. He asked abruptly that when Karen told him to accompany him, she also told him to make sure that he ate. Rust raised his hand and told Ari and Roa not to worry. He's taking good care of himself. Rust remembered that he remembers the days of his student days, because sometimes it happened that Karen stuffed food into his mouth right in the process of working on a project, didn't she? He said that he would listen to their advice and have lunch. They went ahead and Roa offered to have a snack here in the camp canteen. Ari said that the food is cooked in that tent and they eat here, so she goes to get portions for them. Roa said she would go too. Rust smiled and said that it was good. He was relying on them. Rust turned to the side and said that the hippopotamus seemed to be hungry too, yes. He took out a potion from his pocket that transformed the crushed magic stones into a plate. He motioned for the hippopotamus to start eating. After all, animals created with the help of alchemy can suffer if they use a lot or, conversely, a few magic particles. The hippopotamus began to eat his food with a sharp jerk. Along with that, Ari and Roa said they were back with their food. Rust thought that although this menu is quite simple, the ingenuity of the chef is quite noticeable, so he can enjoy lunch. Rust asked if all the people in the camp ate here. Ari replied that she didn't. Many of those who have their own families eat with their loved ones separately, in places where they live directly. There are mostly singles here. He tasted his food and thought it looked like university cafeteria food from his past. When he finished eating, Rust took out a scroll and began to read it. Rust calmly continued to read, but noticed that Ari and Ro were staring at him as if they wanted to say something, although it was not visible because of the cloth bandages on their faces. The guy thought that he could feel their gaze even through the fabric of their bandages. They stare at him as if they want to say something. Rust asked that they notice similarities between the patients. Besides, they know who got sick today. Ari said that she thought he should rest, at least during lunch. They hadn't heard about any new cases of the disease today. As for the similarities, she hadn't noticed anything like that. Russ said that thanks for that too. Roa said there are a lot of singles among them. Ari said it was true. Of course, not all of them are completely single, but still this is a pretty apt remark. Roa said she only brought people to him from single tents. Rust said that they were just loners. The guy asked Ari that mostly singles eat here. The girl replied that yes, that's right. Rust opened the scroll above the food and spoke so that it would be deciphered and then manifested. Ari excitedly asked what happened. Rust looked at the scroll and replied with a smile that he had found it. He shouted loudly for the girls to stop eating, even if it's only a little bit. But there is monster poison here. The guy went on to say that it affects the nervous system, so the symptoms match. Ari screamed for all people to stop eating right now. There might be poison there. Russ said with a smile that yes, he figured it out. He knew he'd come across it somewhere. Roa asked if he had found out something. The guy replied with a smile that he was. Russ thought that most of the sick people came from single tents and many of them ate in the canteen. There are no problems with the water purification tank. He said he thought he had almost figured it out. Ari asked in surprise that he had already figured it out. Roa asked with interest what he had found. A girl came up to them saying that she was in charge of the kitchen. The girl excitedly asked what was wrong with the food they had prepared. Russ said he was sorry for suddenly interrupting her in the kitchen. The guy said that he was a Rust alchemist. He is dealing with the issue of exacerbation of a local disease on the orders of the Knight Karen. They entered a room that was completely filled with dishes. Rust said that this is her kitchen. Everything is clear. He unfolded the scroll and thought that they had just the expected readings here. Rust asked Roa if she could deliver a message to Mrs. Karen. He turned to the head of the kitchen with a request that he would ask her to do something as soon as possible. The girl replied that it was fine. Rust smiled and told the girls that they would meet at Mrs. Karen's tent in an hour. Then he will explain everything to them, what really happened. An hour later, everyone gathered outside Karen's tent. The one in charge of the kitchen and the one in charge of the tents for singles came up to them. Karen said that Mr. Rust could start. The girl asked him what he meant by, the problem with the disease is solved. Rust replied that, yes, they should let him start by explaining the original reason. He went on to say that there was a pond not far from the camp, upstream of the river. There is a monster whose venom affects the nervous system. Karen listened to him carefully. She said that of course they use river water. However, the water storage tank is endowed with the property of purifying it. They may not have the most advanced one, but they would have coped with the neutralization of a toxic substance. Rust replied that she was right. The water in the tank was well cleaned, so that's not the crux of the problem. Karen asked with interest what was the matter then. The guy said that it's not about purified drinking water, but about water that is used for household needs. Karen screamed loudly that this was how it really was. Rust replied that yes. As it turned out, the water for washing dishes and laundry was used directly from the river. In addition, he had also inspected the loner's tent a little earlier. He went on to say that there were traces of the same toxic substance affecting the nervous system on the dishes and washed clothes. That's what was the matter. Rust explained that the poison gradually accumulated in the body through the skin and food. Ari added that because of this, many of the sick lived in single tents and ate in the canteen. The person in charge of the kitchen screamed loudly that she was terribly sorry. The person in charge of the single tent said that he was ready to take full responsibility. Karen raised her hand and told them not to apologize. The girl said that the water being cleaned in the tank was strictly rationed, and she was the one who made such a decision. She looked at those responsible and said that they were not responsible for this. Karen shouted loudly that now they know what to do. It is necessary to look at the standards for all their sections. They must deal with the source of the infection. That is, with the monster living in the pond upstream. Rust took out a monster with tentacles. He said with a smile that he had actually dealt with it already. In fact, the hippo did it when he went swimming in the pond. Everyone looked at him in shock. Rust awkwardly said that they misunderstood. It all happened completely by accident. Karen asked in horror that he could predict the future. Rust replied that no, he definitely does not know how to do that. He pointed to his scrolls, which depicted various magical symbols, and said that the composition of the poison was identical. Karen said that not only did he manage to treat the sick in one evening, he established the cause of the disease the very next day. The girl went on to say that he also killed the monster that was the original cause of the infection. Rust said they only handled it yesterday, so he thinks it's better not to use river water for some time. So he also asked those responsible to get rid of the water they use in everyday life. The girl added that the source of infection has already been eliminated, and it will be possible to resume using river water in a few days. Roa asked the hippo that there were no more such monsters in the pond. The guy said he was glad to inform her that he had fulfilled her order to identify the causes of the outbreak and treat people affected by it. Karen smiled. She waved her hand and said loudly that Master Rust had done his job brilliantly. He surpassed all her expectations by doing something she couldn't even imagine. She sincerely thanks him. Rust smiled and said that this poison came in small portions and accumulated in the body gradually, which as a result led to the disease. So there is a possibility that it will manifest itself in those who suffered from it in the future. The guy added that if there are any changes in their condition, he will continue treatment. She should let them know about it. Karen replied that it was fine, she would pass it on. Rust thought that this was a very good moment for requests. He said that regarding the purification water tank, the guy asked that they were planning some kind of expansion. The young man and the main character, Rust, raised his index finger up and, with a smile and fire in his eyes, said that if they would allocate funds for him, he could do it. Karen said that he needed funds. Then she would gladly provide them. That's how Rust's first mission in the new position, to which Karen appointed him, came to an end. Now you can enjoy life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. He is by no means so optimistic as to perceive everything that way. After all, at the moment he does not know anything about what is currently happening in the Alchemists Association. The events will be narrated on behalf of Eri. Let her introduce herself again. He serves in the Admiralty under Mrs. Karen. Her name is Eri Saad. Roa. Her sister came up to her. She looked at it and said that she was thinking about Master Rasta. Ari thought that at the moment the two of them were in an alley known as Potter Street. The girl began to reason that their task was to purchase bottles of water. The dimensions stated by Master Rust are very large. Ari told Roya that she would call him a bit of an unusual person. Ari thought that when she first looked at Master Rust, she felt that the level of his combat skills was immeasurable. Even if he and Roa had fought him together, they would still have lost. She went on to reason that she had come to realize that they couldn't even compete with his alchemical hippopotamus beast. It was a real shock for them. He and Roa are proud of their position among Lord Karen's subordinates, because they are considered the best of the best. This is probably the reason for her mixed feelings towards Master Rust. Roa said that his amazing strength is enviable. Ari thought that Roa was full of pride for all the training they had gone through together. However, a person so sophisticated in alchemy and possessing skills radically different from their powers is also interesting to her. Perhaps as an older sister, she should condemn her for such an attitude, only she can't do it. Because somewhere deep down, she shares her feelings and just keeps those worries to herself. Ari pointed to the store and asked what she would say about it. They went into the store and ordered bottles. Ari wrote the address on a piece of paper and told them to bring her here. The seller replied that it was fine. He thanked you for the purchase. The atmosphere on another street is more intense compared to Potter Street. I wonder why there are so many gloomy people here. Ari said that there is no harmful influence. Roa replied that she did. The girl told her it was just a feeling. The girls wonder what it could be because of the abundance of magic shops around. They can be sent to the specified store. The sisters went into the magic shop. A girl greeted them. She asked with a smile what she could do for them. Ari thought that they had learned about this shop from Master Rust. Ari looked at the saleswoman and thought she looked pretty young. There are real magic tools everywhere. If you look closely, there are empty places on the shelves. Ari told her that they would like to offer her something for sale. The salesgirl opened her eyes, but at the same moment, She smiled and asked who they came from. The girl looked into the saleswoman's eyes. The black eyes of the salesgirl in the store were directed at the girls. Ari thought she had such an appraising look. Of course, judging by their clothes, they hardly looked like alchemists. The girl took out a scroll and put it on the table. The girl unfolded the message and put it on the table to the girl seller. After reviewing the document, she said in surprise that there was a seal of Mr. Rust. She looked at the girls and asked that they were his messengers. Ari replied that it was. Master Rust sent them here to sell a flask of potion. She asked the saleswoman if she would take their product or if it didn't fit. The woman replied loudly that, of course, high-quality potions by themselves are very rare in their day. In addition, the potions prepared by Mr. Rust are always of excellent quality. She added that she would be happy to buy it, but she was confused about something. Roa asked, putting both hands on the seller's desk, about what it was. The woman looked at the scroll and said that according to this document, the potion should be sold at a set price. The following is an excerpt about the sale at this price. The following is an excerpt about the sale at this price. Ari replied that this was the instruction of the Rasta master. She asked that she was not satisfied with the set price. The woman replied that no, just the opposite. The prices of alchemical goods are now rising. The woman added that for some reason, the supply of products from the association is significantly delayed. So, now such potions will cost many times more expensive. Ari thought that the owner of the store talking to the seller so openly. Now it is clear why Master Rust vouched for the fact that this person can be trusted. Ari told her it was okay. They are satisfied with the usual price. The woman smiled and said that she understood them. Now she will prepare the money to buy the potion. The girls left the store. The salesgirl handed them a heavy bag of coins. Roa looked at the bag of money and said that there were so many of them. Ari replied that she did. I can't believe it's just the set price. She added that it was to be expected from Mr. Rust, because it was his potion. Roa said she was told to use the money for travel expenses. Ari looked at Roa. The girl asked what her sister wanted. The girl asked that she did not want to taste something delicious. Roa waved her head happily. They went into a cafe. Roa began to eat her food right away. Ari looked at her and thought that the event that led them to this assignment had happened only a day earlier. But it was true that there was another half day. The girl continued to argue that before the arrival of the Rasta, Master of the Lord, Karen invited several healers to them. But eventually all these people gave up, unable to cope with the disease. In addition, those of them who were afraid to catch it themselves simply fled in fear of them. It was probably the merit of those first doctors who started the rumor about it. The Healers Guild continued to reject their requests, which threatened them with great trouble. Then, as if by magic, Master Rust appeared and saved them. They acted as Karen had told them to. Roenshi divided the sick camp residents among themselves and took them to Master Rust for examination. Some of them could no longer move freely due to numb limbs. Someone had a clouded mind due to fever when they brought the next patient to Master Rust. The previous one came out of his tent, being already fresh and cheerful. Rust, in the blink of an eye, managed not only the treatment of the sick, but also established the cause of the disease. In addition, he also killed the monster that was the very reason. It seems that Master Rust is special, even among alchemists. Ari told Roa that they could ask Master Rust for help with their eyes. Ari looked at her sister and thought that when she said that, Roa stopped eating. The girl continued to reason that they looked at each other through the cloth and silently nodded. They finally found hope to take the cloth off their faces. The story continues on behalf of the Halesome. He entered the Alchemists Association's special equipment warehouse. The man saw that the room was completely covered with slime. He shouted in shock what it was. Lee Halesome took out a special vacuum cleaner and began to clean everything up. The man angrily said why he should do this at all, especially since it is so terrible. Lee Halesome angrily stated that Rust was to blame for everything who did not appreciate the Alchemist Association. He thought that the association had too many problems lately, which was why the masters had to leave their jobs. A lot of things in this vault were more than just dangerous and needed especially careful handling. Some of the monster's materials could even be blown up without proper care in working with it. Lee Halesome thought that a specialist used to run this place, but it had to be cut due to a reduced budget. He doesn't really remember who took his place, and that was the Basic Research Department. The man angrily said that the Basic Research Department was disbanded. Dangerous materials were no longer monitored, and problems began to appear one after another, in the form of an explosion of dense liquids of scavenger slime. Lehelsam shouted that entry was restricted due to the presence of first-class threat material, which only those with the rank of master can cope with. If it wasn't for this rule, he could have just sent his subordinates instead. A guy ran into the room shouting that they had problems. This guy's name is Tortik. Lehelsam looked at him angrily and asked what happened. He is very important. Tortik excitedly said that it was urgent. The vice president of the Armament Association was shouting loudly for Master of the Hailsam to be called urgently. The man shouted that he should have told him so right away. Lehelsam looked at the huge amount of slime and said that if anyone of the master rank returned, let him tell him to finish everything here. Tortik covered his mouth with his hand, as he felt a terrible smell, and hesitantly said that he would not be able to do this. Lehelsam just gave him an irritated look, did not listen, and quickly walked away, leaving him in a loss. Tortik bitterly said that a beginner like him had no right to tell the masters where to clean up, and that it was even ridiculous. Besides, who even knows when someone will deign to come back here and restore order? The guy left the room and tiredly said that first you need to at least close the door before the magical elements get in here. Tortik tried to touch the door, but a magic sign appeared. He said with annoyance that the door was sealed. Tortik realized that it was impossible to close it without a master rank medallion and felt helpless. Puzzled and confused, he stared at the door for a long time, not knowing what to do, and sighing, decided to just leave. Tortik said that he would then stand at the entrance to the association and wait for someone to come back here. Lehelsam was on his way to the office of the vice president of the Armament Association, gone. He shouted loudly at some guy that how much longer he had to wait. They have already missed all deadlines. The guy replied that he had already explained earlier that the supply of most of the basic materials for the transformations was delayed. Gan angrily said that he had already heard it. That's his problem. Everything about the deadline, right up to the last second, was spelled out in the contract. All equipment and supplies should already be delivered to the army so that it is ready for the next war. The vice president asked how much longer he was going to delay this. They should not think that everything will turn out to be a regular fine if they do not fulfill their obligations of the deal. He looked at the guy and shouted for them to finally call Lehelsam. At this time, a breathless man ran into the office saying that he was very sorry that he had kept him waiting. Lehelsam had arrived. Gan and the guy standing next to him smelled the slime from Lehelsam. The man began to approach and ask what he wanted. The vice president shouted for him to stand there. Gan wondered angrily what was going on right now. Is it normal for a master alchemist to show up in such an inappropriate way to a meeting with an influential business partner? The man told Lehelsam that he stank terribly. Lehelsam sniffed his jacket in his hands and thought it was because of the scavenger. Although he rushed here as fast as he could, he still refreshed himself a little. Was he just used to the stench, being in the warehouse all the time? Lehelsam awkwardly said that he was very sorry, Vice President Gan. He's going to go and change his clothes right now. Gan shouted that he wasn't. He will no longer tolerate waiting for him to deliver what he promised. Lehelsam looked closely at Savas, the same guy Gan had yelled at earlier. The man, not wanting to attract attention, tried to mentally convey the question to him, trying to find out how things were going and what progress had been made. Sabas covered his nose and mouth with his hands and turned his head. Lehelsam wondered what his actions meant. It means that everything is fine. The man told Gan that everything would be ready by tomorrow. Gan shouted so that he would not forget what he had just said. Sabasa looked at Lehelsam in shock. He didn't understand why he said that to the vice president. Sabas said that by tomorrow it was impossible. They were finished. They entered the weapons alchemy department, where there was intense activity. People whispered that the laboratory room was fully assembled, and Master Lehelsam even called those who were on the weekend. Everyone was wondering what he was up to. Lehelsam wasted no time in saying bluntly that he needed to deliver the attribute-altering magic circuits to the Armament Association. It was an important task, and he hoped that Sabas would complete this assignment without delay. Sabasa replied that it was true. They ordered magic circuits that change magic elements to fire elements. Apparently, the army ordered firearms from the Armament Association. Lehelsam asked why the delivery was so late, although accurate calculations are needed there. But he has done this quite often, hasn't he? Tsubasa replied that they did not have enough distilled water. In most cases, they use high-quality distilled water to draw circuits on the boards. Lee Hylasam asked that they needed distilled water, which he was talking about. This is the most basic component of all existing ones. Its creation is one of the first things that alchemists are taught. Even students can create it. Everyone whispered. Torta came up to Lee Hylasam. The man asked what it was. The guy gave him a magic circuit and a device for checking the operation of magic circuits. Tortake said it was a board created from distilled water that they made. Lee Hylasam grabbed it and inserted it into the device. He asked what the problem was. The man said that there are enough magical elements in this crystal. Now, he only needs to activate it, and it will turn the magic elements into flames. Lee Hylasam did it, but nothing happened. He told the staff that there was not enough energy in it, and also the emission of magic elements was not too stable. Tortake regretfully said that it was. He went on to say that, as a last resort, they could use Master Rust's distilled water to create solutions. But it would be great if they could use it for purification as well. Lee Hylasam slammed his fist on the table and shouted at them not to even think of saying the name out loud. The staff thought that his envy of Master Rust really went beyond all bounds. Lee Hylasam said that he would create distilled water much better than his own. They have to finish the magic schemes, otherwise they will have problems. A few hours later, Hylasam walked into the department with a case of distilled water. Sabasi approached him with the documents. He said that the device's measurement readings are here. Lee Hylasam turned away and asked that they were above the norm. Savas thought that the results barely exceed the norm and the safety limits do not come. The risk of reducing the quality of the product increases because of this. He went on to argue that if something happened, it would hit the reliability of the association. That's how they deal with the unexpected. Looking at all these indicators, he understands more and more how good Master Rust's distilled water was. Not to mention that it takes Master Hylasam a lot more time to create it. But he can't say any of it out loud. He doesn't even want to imagine what might happen if he says anything at all. Sabasa said that the indicators meet the standard. Lee Hylasam replied that they should continue the creation. The employee thought wearily that he was as usual. Tortake said that he was very tired and it was already so late. He has a feeling that he has forgotten something. Suddenly the door flew off, and then the slime came out. Tortake was horrified to think that for sure the vault door was open. Did the slime absorb the magic elements and start moving? They have problems. People screamed that the slime had corroded the door. Is it really scavenger slime? It gets bigger when it eats. Sabasa shouted loudly for them to start attacking with whatever they could get their hands on. The guy grabbed the device of magic circuits and then called fire. They started fighting slime against slime. Lee Hylasam shouted that there were magic circuits in that wooden box that needed to be delivered. He continued to shout for them to stop. Lee Hylasam slipped and fell into the slime. They started pulling him out. The man was completely covered in slime, and some of his clothes were torn. People continued to clean the department. They said wearily that they were able to finish here. They can't even move anymore, and the room still stinks. Everything is just terrible. Someone asked what happened to Lee Hylasam. He was told that he had left covered in slime. A girl named Skeeny came into the room. Sabas said that she had finally come. The guy told her it was very important. We need to deliver the magic schematics to the Armament Association first thing tomorrow morning. She can use the transformed beast to transport them. Skinny went to the crates and asked if she just needed to pick it all up. She looked around the ward and wearily told them to get it over with. The story continues on behalf of Karen. Her morning began at dawn. She noticed that her hair was tousled in her sleep, but she did not fix it. She decided that they would settle down sooner or later. As soon as she woke up, she had a good breakfast. Most of all, she likes to eat a good, toasted steak. Unfortunately, the food here is limited. She eats only the same snacks as her subordinates. Then she goes to train with her subordinates. He goes to wash off all the sweat. Then, she somehow copes with the paperwork. But as soon as another problem appears, she meets it with a smile on her face. Karen says that everything will be fine, don't worry. She goes to sleep and has a dream. Karen holds the hand of a wounded friend in the war and says that everything will be fine, no need to worry. She destroyed the enemy, now he can rest. That's how Karen's nights go. She wakes up abruptly and wearily thinks that she had this dream again. She constantly has debts to others. She has to deal with everything. Karen thought that her subordinates had been subjected to a threat unrelated to the battles. When she suddenly realized how powerless she was, Rust came to her defense. She thinks that it's right when the lives of her younger ones could have flowed through her fingers like water. He saved them. One good guy, who was also addicted to finding something new, like her, left the association as soon as she was able to contact him. His boss seems to be incredibly useless. Since he works for her, she decided to give him freedom and encourage him as much as he always deserved. Karen asked Rust that he had woken up today anyway, was going to go somewhere. The guy stopped and replied that she was always there, at the crack of dawn. She said it was rare for him. Rust said that he had nothing to do for the last few days, so he thought he would go and collect materials. Karen replied that it was fine, but he had to be careful. The girl added that she was very grateful to him for his help with the disease. Karen, the admiral of the Dominion, would get him anything he wanted. Rust wondered what had happened since she said that. Karen said she just wanted to tell him that he could rely on those around him. Doing everything on his own without asking for someone else's help is his quality, but also his disadvantage. The girl added that he probably thinks that it's easier and faster to do everything himself, isn't it? She's just worried that one day he'll overexert himself when he does everything by himself. Not everyone likes to notice it. Karen told Rust to trust his like-minded people. She's sure that they will not let him down. The guy smiled and thought that Karen had become a real leader. Rust replied to Karen that he understood everything. Then he would let her pamper him. The girl laughed and said that she would really hope so. They set off together. Karen's days start at dawn, so their long nights are at least a little shorter. She smiled and told Rust that it was great. They should work hard today. Rust and Behemoth were running through the forest. The guy thought he was coming back after he left for a few days with a hippopotamus. Karen gave him a budget to solve the water storage problem. Karen gave him money, saying that she was not very good at money calculations. Rust thought that they had all the necessary monster materials, so they could get down to business as soon as they got the jugs of water. The guy said with a smile that he was even able to catch several monsters besides the one he had originally targeted. It was good that he had prepared scrolls for various monsters. Rust thought that using a scroll that didn't suit a certain kind of monster can trust the materials and use their effectiveness. Rust noticed a settlement in the distance. The guy told the hippopo that they were almost at the camp. He entered the village. People began to cheerfully shout that they were glad to see him back. They asked that nothing had happened to him and how the hunt had gone. Rust waved and thought that there were so many greetings. He feels how excited everyone is about the news of the possibility of increasing their water reserves. Lint came up to him. He is responsible for the food supply. The guy shouted to Rust that he was finally back. Rust replied that he thanked him. He just wanted to talk to him. The guy told Lint that he had hunted monsters on the way here and thought that the parts not suitable for alchemy might be edible, so he brought them with him. Rust added that they can increase the amount of food supplies. Lint asked in surprise that it was true. He would be happy to buy them. Rust said that he had already taken out the necessary materials from them. He didn't process them much. The guy asked where to put them. Lint replied to take them to the place where the monsters were being butchered. Rust went into the tent. People surrounded him because they were interested. The guy awkwardly thought that all these people were so curious. Lint asked Rust where this monster meat was. The guy replied with a smile that he would get it in a minute. Rust magically took out monsters that looked like huge bulls. He asked with a smile what they thought about it. They want to buy it. People shouted that these were 4 male two-line horns. They are very dangerous because they move in groups. Lint was surprised to say that they were in perfect condition. He shouted at 2 guys to come over and help him. Rust said with a smile that there were more, so he would just keep pulling them out. The guy took out a large number of monsters. Rust noted that rats, 3 stars, can be eaten with caution because of the poison. Their meat is delicious. The hell horse, 4 stars, with 3 heads, is edible raw for a day after killing. Its skin is used for clothing. The mole bear, 6 stars, is appreciated for organs. The mole bear, 6 stars, is appreciated for organs for medicine and fur for jewelry. Lint shouted in shock that it was too much. Rust saw the bald man approach the monsters. He said that there were 1,000 rats, a hell horse, a mole bear, as well as some unknown species. He told Rust that he had defeated at least a few mole bears and hell horses, monsters considered especially dangerous. He really wants to fight him one day. Rust awkwardly replied that he left the rest to them. Please let him know when you finish the assessment. The guy quickly went to the exit. He didn't want to fight with anyone. The guy went into his tent. He looked at Rose and said he was back. Russ is grateful to her for taking care of the lizard. Apparently, she was giving him the potion that he left behind. Rust said that his condition has not changed, but, in any case, it means that he has not gotten worse. It's hard to maintain his condition, because he can't even use the same potions with magical elements that people use for him. The guy thought that even monsters can die from an excess of magical elements. If the excess is not enough to kill, the monsters may simply become enraged. Rust went on to argue that they need to be controlled over time, and because Rose is very meticulous. He can fully count on her in such difficult times. The guy told Rosa to keep up the pace. Rust came out of the tent. He said he had to keep working. The guy noticed the water jugs. He also noticed Roa. Rust approached her and said that he was grateful to her for the jugs. They seemed to be pretty good. The girl replied that it was nothing complicated. Rust put his hand on the jug and said that there were no scuffs on them. Great. The guy asked Roa if she had any difficulties. They thought that they could safely prevent all problems with the power in their eyes. Roa replied that the atmosphere in the capital was tense. Some products have gone up in price. Rust said that it was very interesting. Did something really happen? Rust asked, what about Karina? Roa replied that of course they informed Mrs. Karen about it. The guy thought that since Karen also knows about it, then fine. Rust said that all right. All the ingredients are ready. He will install a purification system, so they have to take a couple of steps back. It will just be a conversion. A small tornado appeared. Rust said it would be easy with the hardness of the diamond dust set to maximum. Now he will add crystal clear water. It releases magical energy by maintaining the purity of the water. Crystal clear water obeys the laws of physics again. He begins to increase his entropy, which has been reduced to 0, dissolving the nearest particles, a powder from a magic stone. Rust picked up the bottle and said that here they were. The ink for writing magic diagrams was ready. Roa said that it was still incredible. Rust looked at the girl and thought she was interested. The guy said that further liberation from the limitations of gravity. His goal is to solve the magic scheme. He touched the book and told it to search for water purification. The book began to flip quickly. Rust told me to start deciphering the water purification scheme. Rust thought he was taking this magic solution and making the diagram part of the vase. He said loudly that it was great. Now he will insert a magic crystal for power, and that's it. The guy said with a smile that he would do it with another vase now. Rust did the same with the rest of the vases. Roa happily said, that's it. They can use the water as much as they want. Rust replied that no, this is just the beginning. Surprised, Roa asked what he meant. The guy replied that for now, it's just a water vessel. He wants to make another magic item. They won't even need to take water with him. Roa enthusiastically asked if he could do it. Rust thought she was scaring him a little. He replied that of course. The girl happily said she wanted to see it. Rust said it was time for them to go then. He thought it was normal. It didn't look like there was any danger. The guy and Roa got to the pond where the monster used to live. Rust stroked the beast and asked it to check just in case. The hippopotamus joyfully ran into the water. The guy said that he would make a magic item to scoop up water from the pond. The guy installed the device and thought it was made of durable, waterproof material from the camp. It is covered with a compound with the smell of the poison of catfish tentacles to scare away other monsters, and also contains a magic stone of an unusual monster. The behemoth ran out of the water with a monster fish in its mouth. Rust smiled and stroked the hippopo. He said he was grateful to him. It turns out that there are only such small monsters in the pond. Rust thought that it looked like he was finally being overrun by other monsters after the catfish monster disappeared. The guy adjusted the device and said that everything was correct now. Roa asked what it was. He uses the stone of an unusual monster. Rust replied that he did, so he had to go look for that monster. I had to go to the volcano. Roa asked what kind of monster it was. Rust replied that it was called a paralyzing cloud. The girl shouted in surprise that he had a special danger rank. No physical attacks can defeat him. Rust replied that yes, that's right. They will make sure that they are notified if the pond dries up. They will set the task so that it receives a connection to switch. The guy happily replied that everything was ready now. Now all that remains is to turn it on. A strange magical object appeared after turning on the magic device. Roa asked what kind of magic item it was. Rust replied that he made it, so it's still untitled, but he would call it a cloud water dispenser. Rust placed the object in the water. Clouds began to appear from it. Roa said in surprise that she turns water into clouds. The girl asked that she was heating up. Rust replied that no, it would be too expensive. They have a paralyzing cloud stone for that. Roa looked at him with interest. She asked what it was. The guy replied that the paralyzing cloud is a cloud monster, but it has a body, a magic crystal to rewrite the laws of physics around it. It uses magic. It turns water into clouds and then supports them so that they do not disperse. In fact, he looks like an ordinary monster, but in fact his body is a magic crystal. He said that the clouds were gathering and moving towards the pitchers in the camp. He wrote another magic circle on the jars so that it would become their destination. As soon as the clouds reach them, the magic that changes the laws of physics is cancelled, and they become water again. Russ said that action is better than 1,000 words. Let Roa try to dispel the clouds. The girl replied that it was fine. She started using the spear to try to dispel the clouds. The guy said that immunity to attacks is one of the advantages. In these parts, monsters can destroy pipes if they use them. They would not have had the strength to drive away monsters throughout the entire pipe. The girl admired the clouds. Rust thought she was very interested. He approached the hippopo and told the girl that they should return to the camp as soon as possible. There are 3 techniques in alchemy. The first is the manipulation of life itself. Its peak is the transmutation of beasts. The second is the control of the magic element. The result of this is potions. The third is the impact on life through the elements. The culmination of this is magical items. Alchemists who can master everything are on the path of enlightenment. Rust and Roa reached the camp. They came to the vases. The guy said with a smile that it was great. Their vases are already full. They're done with this assignment. Ari came up to them and called Rasta. The guy asked what it was. She replied that she was glad he was here. Lady Karen was calling him. Rust said that it was good. He would be right there. Rust went into Karen's tent. The girl handed him the scrolls and said she was sorry for calling him, but he had to take a look at it. The guy picked up the messages. He thought there were 2 communication parchments. One is open and the other is still sealed. Karen smiled and said that, as always, he was coping quickly. She added that an ordinary alchemist would have spent a couple of days tinkering with vases and cleaning existing water. Russ said that he would need time to write the magic diagrams while they could postpone the verification. The guy thought that the one that was open was addressed to Karen. Normally, he would have asked for permission, but she gave it to him herself. It won't be a big deal if he reads it. He has already discussed with the feudal lord about the sale of crystals. Karn replied that he'd warned her, but she was still surprised. The guy said that the conditions seemed to be good. Karn said even more. They're incredible, to be honest. She grabbed his collar and pulled him closer to her. Karen asked what kind of trick he used. Rust said in surprise that she thought he was using a trick. The guy told the girl that she would tear his clothes. Karen let go of his collar and said she was sorry. Rust adjusted his clothes and thought that, given her strength, if she had pulled, she would have torn his head off. Karen thoughtfully said that it cost them almost nothing. Maybe they made a mistake in something. Rust told her that she would receive a business offer for magic crystals from a neighboring feudal lord. But not like that. A neighboring feudal lord may contact her. The guy continued to reason that, although the offer did not even specify the exact type of crystals. Rust told Karen that there were no tricks. The assumption was related to old magic crystals. The girl asked in shock what he was saying about H32. Really, he can do it. Rust smiled and replied that that was exactly what he meant. Karen clutched her head and said that yes, of course he could. She added that she realized there were no such people anywhere. Rust asked what she was saying about the H32 or the magic weapon. The girl replied that she did not. Most of the military were her subordinates. They know their business. Rust said what was to be expected. Karen said it didn't matter. She is sure that this intersects with the interests of the capital. In fact, it will be a direct conflict. The guy smiled and replied that, more or less. Karen said he wasn't even worried. She came to her senses that she had said it out loud. Rust chuckled at her words. Karen straightened her hair and wearily asked what he wanted to tell her. That she should do something about it. Rust said that he had already asked Harold about it. The answer is in this scroll. The guy threw it to Karen, who caught it easily. Rust thought that Harold was a mutual friend of theirs. They had studied at the academy with him. Karen asked what it was from Harold. He works at the treasury. Now she understands everything. She studied the message from Harold carefully. She didn't want to miss anything. Karen said that it seems that problems are brewing in the capital. Ari and Roa told her. But she didn't think it was that bad. She asked with a happy smile that this was a great opportunity. Rust replied that he needed to do it quickly. She just has to say it, and he's ready. Karen put the scroll on the table and said that it was fine. Now they would wait. She added that she would give him more than he could carry. Rust replied with a smile that it was accepted. The girl smiled back at him. She was really happy. Rust thought that such conversations reminded him of their school days. A new day has come in the camp. Rust was lying on the behemoth's back in the open air. He said that the breeze was pleasant here. Rust thought that their crystal trade with the neighboring Dominion was opening today. He's at the entrance to the camp, waiting for Ari and Roa. The guy continued to argue that the sun was so pleasant here. Waiting here is not so scary. Suddenly, Roa said loudly that they were already here. They needed to get up. Rust jumped off the behemoth and tried to see something. The guy thought that Roa was looking far away. He can't see anything. They'll probably be here soon. The girl told Rust that she saw them all. One of them is very strong. The guy tried to take a closer look and see their guests. Rust thought that he had entrusted all the negotiations to Karen because he did not know the details. He smiled and said he could see. Karen said before they left that the negotiations were very boring, with such trump cards. Rust thought he had seen the contract. The worst part is being betrayed by the employee on his side. The guy reasoned that he turns Kagura fruits into crystals and earns a lot of money without restrictions. He was only asked to warn about changes in production volume, which seemed surprisingly profitable to him. The men who were leading their mules came up to them. Rust thought that was understandable. There is no infrastructure in this region. It would be hard on wheels. It turns out that mules are the best option. He went on to argue that if they think about the future, their priority will be roads. The development of a remote region with virtually no resources requires a decision on priority, both from a political and economic point of view. Rust added that his boss, Karen, is responsible for all this. The guy looked at the guests and said in surprise, "What happened?" Some were injured. Roa replied that it looked like it. Someone must have attacked them. Rust said that he did not see much damage. They probably fought back. One of the travelers took off his hood. It turned out to be Czar, whom Rust met in the village while walking to Karen. The guy greeted him. Czar ran up and joyfully said that it was Master Rust. He is very happy to participate in this deal. Rust smiled and told him not to worry. They can talk like they used to. Czar said he was sorry. He's not used to this. Rust said he was glad to see that they were doing well. He noticed that some were injured. He can cure them if they want to. Czar shouted in surprise that he was simply amazing. Rust cured everyone with his potion. He said that this universal elixir, prepared recently, should help well. Rust thought that no one had serious wounds. The potion is not very effective, but it should work. People were hurt, but not mules. They probably had to leave a few. Roa said that Master Rust looked ahead. The guy turned his head and saw the holy knight Tala. The girl smiled broadly and greeted him. Rust said he didn't expect to see her here. He didn't think she would be with the delegation. The girl replied that she had come here to talk to him. I happened to come by Tama and heard that they were coming here, so I asked to join the convoy. Czar awkwardly said that she had saved them from many troubles. Rust smiled and replied that he understood. The guy thought that he had met two old friends. Czar went up to the hippopo and shouted in surprise what it was. Rust told Tala that he was welcome to the borderlands. He thought it was the beginning of a new story. Rust asked Tala how she was doing. The girl replied that she was very well. It was all thanks to him. She wants to thank him again for her rescue in the forest. The guy replied that no, he should thank her for guarding them along the way. Rust told the girl that he was sure she was tired. He asked her what she thought of giving a rest so that she could relax later with a cup of tea. The guy thought that she seemed to want to say something, but so that others would not hear. The guy asked Tala that she did not want to go into her tent. The girl replied that she was grateful to him. She would gladly accept this invitation and go with him. Rust called Roa. She asked what happened. The guy asked that she could take Kagero fruits to the square inside the camp. The girl replied that she would carry out his order. Tala went into Rast's tent. She said in surprise that it was incredible. The girl asked with interest that all this furniture was made of vines. Rust replied with a laugh that they had no thorns, so she had nothing to fear. She can sit down. Rust put 2 cups of tea on the table. He said he wanted to ask Miss Tala. The girl interrupted him and said that she could just Tal. After all, he had saved her life. Tala added that she swore an oath that her sword belonged to him. She is nothing but the god she serves, so formalities are unnecessary when they talk. The guy replied that then she could just call him Rust. Now Tala has to drink the tea while it's hot. The girl smiled and said that she was grateful to him. Tala sniffed the tea and said it had a very rich aroma. Rust thought that enjoying the aroma of rose tea and spending time together should help melt the ice. The girl told Rust that she wanted to talk to him about the shaman. Rust asked if it was the shaman who sent the familiar after her. The girl replied that yes. Tala said that after he left, his footprints led her to the capital. The shaman is responsible for the destruction of her church. Since she was cursed by him, he always knew where she was. The girl went on to say that since he was able to lift the curse, she was able to track him down and find his secret lair. With tears in her eyes and deep sadness in her voice, the girl knight Tala said that, however, he was able to escape. Tala handed him a magic diagram. She said she found it there and there's a lot of it. Rust asked what he could take a look at. The guy quickly put on gloves with the effect of purifying curses. He thought it might be cursed. Rust studied the object the girl had given him. The guy asked Tala that she had shown it to the Metropolitan Alchemical Association. The girl replied that she did not. She wanted to, but when she got there, everything was in a terrible state. There are holes in the walls of various sizes, which were hastily stabbed. Tala went on to say that there was a pungent smell in the air, and the workers looked like the walking dead. Rust wondered if slime was raging there. He doesn't believe they left him unattended. The girl said that this thing could cause even more problems considering where it came from. So I left the rest to my personal friends. Tala added that she herself decided to take it to someone who was familiar with such things and whom she can trust. That's how she ended up here. Rust said it was a wise decision. The girl asked loudly and with interest that it was true. Rust confidently replied that yes. This is a magical scheme that turns magical elements into flames. In addition, it is intended for military use. The guy went on to say that he had no doubt that it was made by the Alchemical Association. Transmutations are very characteristic of them. Tala said that there were also many magical weapons in the cache. The girl said that, in general, the chances of a connection between the Alchemical Association and shamans are high. Rust confidently replied that yes. This is all very suspicious. The guy thought that a weapon capable of shooting magical elements is very effective against non-human life forms. Monsters will die if they receive a large amount of magic elements. He went on to say that everything would be fine, even if you shot a person by mistake. Because of this, magic cannons are called simple weapons for people who are not trained in military affairs. Rust told the girl that converting elements leads to what is called conversion loss. It is necessary to use this against monsters. The guy added that if someone needed to turn magical elements into flames using this scheme, Tala interrupted him and said that it turns out they wanted to use him against people, didn't they? Rust replied that it was true, but there was one problem. The girl asked what the problem was. He replied that it was possible that when used, it would explode, by causing damage to everything that happens to be nearby. He went on to say that it doesn't seem like that's how it was intended. It's more of a defect. Tala asked that it was very bad. He replied that yes, it was. Rust thought that, judging by the state of the circuit, it had been partially eaten by slime. He used to work there, and the kind of sloppy management is really frustrating. Tala talked about how she had done the right thing by coming here. She is grateful for the assistance. Rust replied that no. She had brought him very useful information. The girl said that she had to meet with his boss, Lady Karen. She asked Rust that he could take her to him. He replied that he did. He also wanted to introduce her to Karen. Tala smiled and said that the tea was delicious. She is also grateful to his beautiful transmutated beast. The girl left the Rasta tent to go about her business. Rust stood in front of several bags of fruits. He said with a smile that it was time to get back to work. Czar and the others are on their way tomorrow. So you need to transform Kagero fruits into magic crystals. He added that he would have to skip the welcome party of their guests, but he feels that this is a great business opportunity. It would be better if he took care of everything as soon as possible. Rust picked up a berry and thought that he just couldn't miss this opportunity. He said that it was time for him to start. The guy will do everything possible to make it. The story continues on behalf of Tala. The girl was sitting in front of a plate full of varied and delicious-looking food. She thought she was at a dinner party right now. The lord of the local lands, Lady Karen, is sitting opposite her. To the right and left are those whom she thought could be called her closest assistants. This fruit on the table looks very tasty. Karen called Tala to get her attention. Karen smiled and said that, "Welcome to the Dominion, Admiral. The world is really small. The good done returns." To think that a Rasta acquaintance would guard their work. It must have been hard. Karen mentioned that they had prepared a meal especially for her. Tala closed her eyes and replied that she was very grateful to them for that. The girl bit off a small piece of meat. Tala thought that it was the meat of a cow monster. It seems to dissolve in her mouth, and after it, the herbs in the sauce fill her head with their fragrance. She continued to talk about how they were rushing through her entire body. Seasonings and herbs are perfectly balanced intertwined with meat juice. The magical elements found in the meat of monsters are of such high quality. It must be a high-ranked monster. Tala told Karen that this meat contains high-quality magical elements. She asked Karen what the two-horned thing was. The girl replied with a smile that she was a gourmet. Karen said that yes, it is a two-horned one. The girl noticed that the steak was made from an adult female. Tala was surprised to say that it is said that females possess the largest number of magical elements, even for two horns. She added that it was understandable then why so many magical elements were flowing through her entire body. Ari mentioned that this one was caught by Mr. Rust himself. Tala thought that if she remembered correctly, it was Miss Ari. The girl told her that it was clear that his skills as a hunter matched his skills as an alchemist. Ari replied that she did. Tala thought about the girl's words in surprise. She noticed that the atmosphere had changed. The waitress put a drink on the table and said that she was grateful for the wait. Tala picked up a massive mug and thought that it was a cold ale. She took a sip. Tala thought that this bitterness of fragrant hops, cool and rich taste, washes away the juice of the meat of the two-horned. The girl put the empty mug on the table and said that this ale was delicious. She talked about how she didn't think she could find such a good cold ale in the lands of Remoth. He warms her inside. She should have expected this from the lands she governs. Tala added that it looks like they have advanced cooling items. Karn replied that in general, they were made by Mr. Rust. He creates a lot of interesting things. When he has time, he offers them to improve the camp. Karina looked into Tala's eyes and said that it was all for their sake. The girl thought that she thought Karen was defending herself, but she didn't blame her either. Karen asked about what Tala was doing in Rasta's tent. The girl thought that now everything is clear. She takes care of her friend. Taking care of her comrades is something she lost after the attack. Tala went on to say that for someone who had also lost all her comrades, she looked quite radiant. The girl told Karen that she was chasing the shaman to avenge the death of her friends. Tala went on to say that she had found a clue based on alchemy, and therefore decided to turn to him. Karen said that's why she came to the borderlands, but she's sure there are plenty of talented alchemists in the capital. Tala said that she doesn't know anyone more gifted than Rust. He also directed her this time. She cannot believe the alchemists from the capital, as they may be related to the shaman. Karen smiled and said that Rust was really very talented. Tala thought she looked happy, as if they were talking about her. She's so radiant. Tala said sadly that she was jealous of Karen. She used to have a lot of friends, too. Karen asked what the shaman had done. The girl replied that yes, it was him. She thought that maybe it was because of the alcohol. Tala said that the moon was shining so brightly that night, before she realized the whole situation. She began to talk about her comrades who had been killed by the shaman. 2 gons ago, the churches of the Arislaw parish of Turnikilt. Tala heard about someone calling her. The girl was hugged from behind by a little girl named Cheetah. She handed Tala the doll. The girl happily said that it was for her. Tala asked what she had done to pay her. Cheetah replied with a smile that she did. The girl said that the doll was nicely made. Tala asked the girl if she wasn't bad at sewing. Cheetah replied that of course when she pricks her fingers it hurts, but she gave this doll to her, so she wanted to make her a dress. The girl said that she understood. She is very nice. The doll is happy too. Cheetah asked that she was going to the city. Tala replied that yes, they needed to buy the usual things. The girl said that then she wanted a cute bow for her doll. Tala knelt down and stroked Cheetah's head. She told her it was okay. A girl hugged Tala from behind. She turned her head and saw Forte. She asked Tala that she was going shopping. She really asks her to buy some mole bear cookies. Forte added that she and Ale would be waiting. Tala showed her the sign that means good. Tala thought the church was in the woods outside the city, so they usually had to take a long walk if they needed to buy something. It was her turn that day. There were a lot of things to buy, so she wanted to get out early. Suddenly, Lady Sala, Abbess Sala Maining, called out to her. Tala told her that she was going shopping. Sala asked that she go to the city first and then to the forest as usual. The girl replied that yes, they need medicinal herbs and going to the city is a good opportunity to get them. Sala asked what it was all about, just medical expenses. She has to be careful with her training. It would be bad if she got hurt all by herself. Tala thought that Lady Sela was like a mother to her. She always knew and was compassionate, adored by everyone. Sela told the goddess Aresla to keep an eye on her. Tala asked Karen that she knew the 3 faces of Aresla. The girl replied that yes. Love? Tala interrupted her and said that there was also wisdom and revenge. The girl continued to say that she has power, so she was in a special position learning 2 ways at once, love and revenge. Because of this, her training could take a long time, and she returned that day after dark. At this time, the shaman attacked. Tala was walking through the forest. She thought it was too late. The girl said with a smile that she had a cute bow and rare ingredients. She thinks she will be forgiven. The girl thought that Lady Sela would be angry with her as always. Tala saw a bright flash. She said in surprise, "What kind of light is that over the hill?" She hurried to the church. Tala stopped, and what was happening shocked the knight's girlfriend. The whole church was on fire. She dropped her bag and ran inside. She stopped in front of Cheetah, who was lying on the ground with her doll. The girl thought that she hated pain so much, and now she's dead. Her doll is lying like an old rag. Tala looked up and saw that the fire was spreading more and more. The assembly hall burned the most. She thinks that's where the fire started. The hall was closed from the outside. Through the broken window, she could see silhouettes in the flames. Moving as if in a tank, Tala screamed for someone to help her. The girl told Karen that she couldn't do anything. Then dawn came, and then the flames subsided. She found Mother Superior Sela first. The girl said that her body lying on the ground was badly burned, but her facial features were still visible. Her smile remained even after death, and when she touched it, the shaman's trap worked. There was a curse mark on it. The shaman desecrated her body. He knew how much everyone loved her, and therefore used her death to curse everyone who would be around. Tala said that she would never forgive their deaths, and that he was playing with Lady Sela. The bruises on her face from the curse were like a symbol of the shame he had done to Lady Sela, so she was sorry. The girl began to cry and added that she was very sorry. They all had to live much longer than she did. She should be the one to die. Karen walked up to her and took her hand. She told Tala that she was sorry for making her go through painful memories again. Tala listened to her, and then she tried to stop her tears. She told Karen that she had to. I'm growing up because he lifted the curse. She's going to shine her sword at him after she gets her revenge. Karen replied that yes, they would be waiting for it. Tala began to cry again. She said that she was very grateful to Karen for everything. Tala thought that like that, following Rust, she also started calling Karen only by name. Meanwhile, Rust was dealing with crystals. The guy said wearily that he had already done quite a lot. He thinks it's been hours since he started the transmutation, so he's starting to get thirsty. Ari came up to Rust. He asked what it was. The girl put down the tray and said that she had brought food and drink. She asked if he wanted to take a break. Rust said in surprise that he was grateful to her. He's really thirsty. He did a good job, so you can rest. Rust took the tray of food in his hands and began to eat on the weight. Ari said their tents are nearby so she can bring him a chair if he wants. The girl went to the tent and brought 2 chairs for herself and for Rasta. The guy awkwardly said that he was sorry for the inconvenience. Ari replied that it was not worth it. It was not a problem. Rust said that then he would start. He gulped down a mug of ale. Rust said that then he would start. He gulped down a mug of ale. He happily thought that the ale seemed to have renewed his throat, which had been working for several hours. Ari said Linta brewed it recently for a welcome banquet. The girl added that he was very proud of the work he had done because he was trying to make it perfect. He's been working through trial and error ever since he moved here. Rust said the ale was really good. I never thought that he could have such a fragrance. Perhaps he used ingredients from plant-type monsters. The guy asked that he not only manages the food, but also makes drinks. Ari replied that as far as she remembers, he was very happy when they noticed the barley monster. He even went hunting for them. Rust looked at the food and said it was a 2-horn steak. He thought he had eaten it a few times before, but this is the first time he has been so fat. The guy said the cooking in this camp is good. Although the ingredients are the same, he does not get tired of them, because they are prepared in a new way every time. Ari replied that it was because cooking was the only thing they could enjoy here. The girl said quietly that she wanted to talk to Mr. Rust. The guy put down the spoon and asked what she wanted to say. Ari replied that he had noticed that his sister and she had special powers. Rust said he realized they probably had them when they set up an ambush outside the camp. Rust went on to say that he thinks Roa can see very, very far when she can determine how strong people or monsters are. Somehow it turns out. Ari replied that it was very good. He's almost right. Roa, as he said, has both powers. She can look far and determine strength. She can only look into the future in a limited way. Rust said it was understandable. This power sounds incredible. Magical eyes are very rare, but Roa has 2, and she can see the future. He thought that this kind of thing only existed in legends. Ari said that her view of the future is not so strong. He reacts to possible conflicts and gives her the opportunity to see a couple of seconds ahead. As she said, he is limited. Rust said loudly that he didn't. He's amazing. Rust asked what it meant that she knew his fighting style. The girl looked at him, but did not answer. The guy thought that her face was hidden by a cloth, but he could easily imagine her smile. Rust spoke so that she would forget about his question. He's more interested in what she's sure of. He went on to say that she had told him so much about her magical eyes, especially about the activation condition. Ari replied that she had made a decision based on his actions. The girl said that, for her, family is her secret, but also people risking their lives to develop these lands. He helped them a lot. She decided to tell him everything because she trusts him. Rust replied that he understood. She can keep talking. The girl touched the mask and said that she would like to tell him about it. The guy thought that, judging by the reaction of the magical elements, what he was feeling. He told the girl that it was a magical item that worked like a seal. Ari replied that she did. He really knows everything. These are special magic items. There are only 2 of them in the whole world. The girl added that Rust could tell what they were for just by looking. He said that in truth, it wasn't that impressive. For the most part, he guessed right. Rust asked them if they wanted him to fix them. Ari shook her head. The girl replied that these magical items were created so that their abilities would not get out of control. Ari went on to say that they are gradually becoming less effective. Rust said in surprise that if they didn't need repairs, it meant that their abilities were still growing. The guy added that he had thought about how to create 2 new magic items, but it would take time. Ari happily asked if it was true. She knelt down in front of Rust. She said loudly that she was thanking him. She swears that she will not be in debt for his help. Rust raised his hand and told her to get off the ground. The guy asked what she remembered that she had just said. Ari asked in surprise that she had said something. Rust replied that he did. She herself told him that they were a family and that together they were risking their lives for the development of the lands. He added with a smile that this meant that she and Roa were also his family. He will help in any way he can. He's grateful for the food, but it's time for him to get back to work. Rust said he would take a closer look at him and Roa tomorrow. Ari happily said that yes, it would be tomorrow. She bowed after him. The guy thought it was time to take up magic crystals again. A new day has come. Zar looked at the crystals and asked in surprise that he had actually done all this in one night. Rust awkwardly asked if they could carry it all. Zar said it was just unbelievable. He shouted to his men to start harnessing the mules. He was loudly shouted that everything would be done now. Czar told Rust that he was just doing something with something. The headman of their village says that he is indeed a great alchemist, but he has exceeded all his expectations. The guy smiled at him. The man happily said what he had come up with. Rust should let him send for an important person. Rust said in surprise that it was not worth doing anything. Czar did not listen to him, and Rust and Karina found themselves in a tent in front of an important person. The guy told him he was glad to meet them. He is Mammals, the city official. He's from the Dabbleton Dominion. Rust was surprised to think that he was responsible for the deal. Mammal said that he wanted to admit that he was surprised. To be honest, he did not expect that a whole mountain of Kagero fruits would turn into magic crystals overnight. Mammals added that now they can talk about the reward. Rust thought that maybe the village headman had given a recommendation about him to his feudal lord. The guy continued to reason that the headman told the feudal lord that he would complete the work overnight, so he should prepare the payment in advance. Rust looked at Mammals, who was writing something. He thought that the feather in his hands was a magical artifact. It writes through magic, with the help of elements that prevent any rewriting or forgery of important documents. Rust looked at the seal that Mammals' servant had brought. He thought that this seal was also a magical artifact. The guy looked into the letter a little to find out the information. Rust thought with a smile that the amount of money indicated in the document was more than twice the budget received by the Department of Basic Research for the whole of last year. Karen said that it was very good. They may consider that they are now even. She handed the documents to the assistant and told him to pay Mr. Rust's share in accordance with the contract. The girl stood up from her seat and said loudly that she was currently announcing the establishment of an alchemy research department in this dominion, under her direct control, and appointing Mr. Rust as his chief. The guy looked surprised, but then got down on his knees and put his hand on his heart. Rust thought that this could generally be considered an official decision, but he had somehow gotten used to Karen's behavior. Now he has to show his gratitude to Karen. Karen said loudly that she was officially stating this on behalf of the ruler of this dominion, Admiral Karen. The money earned from the sale of magic crystals will temporarily go to the department's budget. Mine is the share of the aforementioned Mr. Rust. The man who recorded all her words was very surprised by this statement. Rust thought awkwardly that creating a new department was not an easy task. He wants to pray for him, just thinking about how much paperwork he has to do. Karen told Mammals with a smile that she was ready to continue the conversation with him. As previously discussed, they will deliver the crystals to the agreed destination, including his possessions. He'll figure out the little things himself. He can't wait to put these strategic resources to good use. Rust thought that Karen's talents were best revealed during planning, but it was really easier for him to leave everything to them. Karen said that they would end the conversation there. Rust should stay a little longer. The guy thought she was going to talk to him about this new department. Tala came up to him and greeted Rust with a smile, who was wondering what they would talk about with him. She congratulates him on assuming his new position. Rust awkwardly replied that it was all so unexpected, he didn't know what to even think about it. The girl said that she would really like to see him in action, but she had to use the information about the shaman that he had given her. Tala smiled and said that she was leaving, hoping that everything would be fine with him. Rust looked at Tala's back, leaving, and said that of course he would be fine. He hopes that she will be able to take revenge on the shaman for everything he has done. Rust returned to his conversation with Karen. The girl pointed her finger at the document and said that these would be his duties. She will count on him to do everything in the best possible way. Rust replied that of course he would do everything. The guy thought that, judging by Karen's words, his activities in essence would not change much. He is very pleased that he will be able to continue to carry out his fundamental research within the framework of his current duties. Karen added that he should definitely write down in the report how much and on what he spent. Rust thought that she had also said that with his money he could do whatever came into his head, but within reason. Karen started to leave, but suddenly stopped. She said, "I'm growing up that this is of course just a department, but she wants to gradually have more people in it so that the department can expand in principle. She hopes that it will become a full-fledged, independent organization." The girl told the guy to think about the name. Rasta thought about the girl's words about the name. Karen left the tent. Rust looked at the table with books and utensils. He thought the name was a little off. He definitely wouldn't want it to hint at any connection with the Alchemists Association. Rust continued to argue that this organization, no matter how you look at it, is still under the direct control of the state. Should he give the name of the organization, which is characteristic of the Admiral's dominion, the guy decided that in any case, he wouldn't come up with anything out of the blue. Rust called for the scroll and said that there was no hurry, so he would focus on what he could do now. Two shadows appeared, standing in front of Rasta's tent. They didn't do anything, but it was obvious that they were going to enter. It turned out to be Ari and Roa. One of the girls said that they were asking the Rasta master to let them in. The girls entered the Rasta tent. The guy smiled and said he was sorry for pulling them out. He would like to examine them for what Ari was talking about back then. Ari bowed to him and said she was very grateful to him. They know how busy he is. Russ thought that the last time Roa was here, she was also constantly inspecting the tent. She's probably looking at the rose with a magic eye that allows her to see through objects. Russ looked at Rosa and said that he asked her to create 2 chairs for Ari and Roa. 2 chairs appeared under the girls, which forced them to sit on them. Rust sat down on a chair and said that they could start. He wants to study the flow of magical elements passing through their eyes and the functioning of the magical tissue that suppresses them. Ari said it was understandable. Roa replied that it was fine. Russ said that he would first wrap the sealing scroll on top of the existing one. It will completely seal out. The guy added that he would do a little research on their magical tissues in the meantime. The girls looked at each other, and Roa asked who would be the first. Rust smiled and thought that this question was so full of fear, but they could be understood. He also thinks it's a dangerous idea. After all, they will have to remove the magical artifact that they always wear on their faces. The guy said that they would start with Roa. He had heard that Ari's magical eyes put more stress on the body. The girl replied that everything would be fine. No need to worry. Roa said that they completely trusted him with themselves. Rust smiled and held out a small scroll. He told Roa to wrap the scroll around Roa's head so that the scroll would cover her eyes. Ari picked up the scroll and studied it carefully. She went up to her sister and said that she was starting. The girl lifted the blindfold and covered her eyes with the scroll. Ari told Rust that everything was ready. The guy said it was okay. He's starting. He touched the girl and with the help of magic began to read information from her. Rust took his hands off and said that everything was ready. He asked Roa how she was feeling. The girl replied anxiously that she saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. The guy said that this means that his scroll is working properly. Rust fixed her hair and told Ari to take the artifact off her sister. It's safe. Ari replied that it was fine. She would do everything now. The girl took the cloth off her sister's face. Rust and Ari looked at the girl in surprise. It was so unusual to see her without a mask. Roa started crying and told Ari that she didn't need to see anything, but everything was so weird. Rust was surprised by her words. He didn't know how to properly understand Roa's feelings. Ari ran up to her sister and hugged her tightly. She put her hand on her head and began to stroke her a little. Roa buried her head in her sister's stomach. She felt strange. Ari told Roa that everything was fine. Rust looked at them with a smile and thought it was better to immediately inspect the Roa artifact. The guy called Rose and told her to give him a magic element tester. The rose, with the help of its branches, handed him the device. The guy picked it up and told Rosa that he was grateful for her help. He went to his desk and began to prepare everything. He thought that the magic element tester was a device that sent out weak magic waves in order to test artifacts. It sends out waves very similar to those sent by human bodies to check the flow of elements and artifacts. The guy said in surprise that the magic stone did not show anything. He put his hand on the bandage and said that the source of magic was here, in the fabric itself, right in the bridge of Roa's nose when she wears it. The source of magic for artifacts to be worn on the face is usually located here, on the bridge of the nose. The guy took the pendulum in his hands and held it up to the mask. Rust thought that now he needed to measure the magic sweat with the help of a pendulum dowsing. Right when he was researching the disease, the pendulum stopped at the place where the fabric touches the bridge of the nose. Rust thought that the structure of this artifact was quite simple. This is an energy store, and this is an amplifier, and here is a noise canceller. Rust stopped and wondered what it was doing here at all. There are plenty of options for how this can be rebuilt at the functional level. He continued to argue that the construction itself is very painstaking, and the magic stream burning inside is also a good solution. Rust studied the fabric carefully once more. The guy looked at the symbol and thought that it looked like the alchemist who created them was second-rate at best. He could combine several magic streams that he already has, and then immediately do something better. Rust put his hand on the mask and thought that these artifacts were definitely made by a person who cares about Ari and Roa. He's not sure how much of this it cost them to know. Rust looked at the girls. He saw that Ari was holding Roa's head so that she would be sure that she was not alone in the tent right now. Roa sat quietly and just talked to her sister. Rust thought that Roa seemed to have calmed down. Now he understands everything. Maybe the psychological factor is also very important in this case, which the girls faced. The guy continued to reason that the sense of security that this artifact gives to Roa should be much more effective than this artifact itself. Rust smiled at the girls and said that was probably it. He handed Roa a cloth and asked that he could now examine Roa more closely. The guy looked at Ari. He told her to return this artifact to Roa's face. Rust spoke loudly to make the seal disappear. The girl's face shone, and her hair rose a little because of the magic. Rust took the scroll and wrapped it back up. He went up to Roa and told her to give him her hand. The girl held out her hand to him, but she was very worried about Rust's actions. The guy took Roa's hand and spoke loudly to activate the joint protocol. The governing body is the Rast transfer. His goal is the Roa. He went on to say that the control transfer is a sealing scroll. Now finish the protocol. Roa felt that there was a scroll in her hands. She didn't understand why she needed them. Rust said with a smile that he had several such scrolls. She could take this one for herself. The guy continued to argue that he had taught her how to use them. She can use it, for example, when she wants to rest. Rose raised her head, but then quickly lowered it. Rust was surprised to think that things seemed to be going badly. Roa is unhappy about something. The girl shook with an overabundance of emotions and whispered that she was very grateful to him. Rust looked at her and thought that Roa whispered it very softly, but he clearly heard everything. Ari smiled behind her mask and went over to her sister to calm her down. Both girls were very happy. Roa couldn't stop crying. She didn't expect it to be like this. Rust looked at them with a smile. Their joy passed on to him. Rust was sitting at a table and carefully examining two masks. They looked like simple pieces of white cloth. It was impossible to even think that these items were related to magic. The guy thought that he had finished examining Ari and Roa, as well as their masks, and tried to create new artifacts. There were stacks of books on Rust's desk that helped him figure out the problem of Ari and Roa. Rust wanted to help his girlfriends who had been standing for a long time, but he wasn't sure if he should give them to the girls. He went on to argue that their effectiveness was much higher, but during their analysis, he felt that the person who created them, whoever he was very close to Ari and Roa. But is this game worth the candle? The guy understands that if he gives them artifacts, they will have to say goodbye to the old ones. Hichi thinks about their unique powers. He understands that they are very rare. They still don't know or understand a lot about them, and besides, there is a high probability that the psychological component greatly affects the level of control. Rust said that if it were all about controlling their magical power, their favorite magical artifacts could be improved much better. The new masks looked simpier than the old ones. He understands that it's not easy. It can create a device that measures the degree of control in order to compare artifacts. He picked up the pen and started twirling it. Rust put his hand on his head and tried to focus on his task. The guy said loudly that if we talk about problems, lately it seems to him that his research has reached a dead end, mostly because of his two main enemies stalking him from his last job and strange assignments along with a terrible limited budget. Rust said that he now has money, and he can try a different approach. The guy looked at the masks thoughtfully. That's right, he needs a different approach. Instead of increasing his indicators, he needs to come up with the ability to turn them on and off completely if he chooses a small period of time and adds automatic control to it. The main character abruptly took a piece of paper and quickly began to draw something on it with a pen. He said that if he unfolded this form and then added something, it should work out very well. He sat in front of this drawing all night. Rust was trying to finish his business as quickly as possible. Ari and Roa came to Rust's tent. The guy smiled at them and said that he thanked them for waiting. He made new artifacts for them. The girls came up to his table very happily. They saw glasses and a monocle. The design was very simple, but no one wanted them to be constantly noticed. These were absolutely classic vision devices. The girls began to twist these objects unknown to them. Ari asked what they needed to do with it. and also how they could use it. Rust replied that she should separate these long and thin metal parts of the glasses. The girl did as the guy said. He said that yes, it was all right. Now she has to put them on her eyes. Eri asked if she had done everything right. The guy replied with a smile that yes, that's exactly what is needed. Now they can take the veils off their faces. The girls have done it. Now they can walk without bandages. Roa carefully put on the glasses that the main character had made for them. She held them a little at the edges and exclaimed in surprise. Ari followed Roa's example and smiled, also exclaiming with restraint and pushing a strand of hair behind her ear with her hand. The girls looked at each other. Roa shouted joyfully that Ari's face turned out to be so cool. The girl replied to her sister with a smile that there was a sense of novelty in this sense. Rust said they looked good on them. The guy thought he was pleased with the result. Ari said that maybe it's because she's not used to it, but she really likes it. They came to the pond. Rust said that now he had to explain to them how to use them. They will start with the Roa. The girl took her spear and began to strike at the monsters that live in the water. Rust stood aside and watched the girl. He asked her how she was, if everything was working well, if there were any defects. The girl replied that it was good, even more than that. She is satisfied with everything in this subject. Roa touched her glasses. The guy thought that this would trigger the sealing mode of the force. She immediately caught an armored salmon. It has very rough scales. Pickled caviar of this fish is a very popular dish. She's going to test the effectiveness of the new artifact until she's completely satisfied. It looks like armored salmon are swimming upstream in a large group. The guy added that it was because the hippopotamus had taken the boss of the monster catfish pond. Rust told Roa that even Karen couldn't pierce such armored scales with one blow. The girl replied that she was hitting between the scales. Rust stepped aside and wondered if they could be used as materials for his cases. Suddenly, Roa ran up to Rust. The girl told him that everything was fine with the artifact. Rust asked if she would have any complaints. Maybe it's not convenient for her to switch modes, or the artifact slips during combat, or there's something like that. Roa replied that she did not. Ari spoke tiredly so that her sister would not behave so rudely with Rust because he helped them. She should answer him well and politely. Roa lowered her eyes and said that she was able to control her magical eyes exactly according to her desires. The girl added that because of this, she clearly sees the world around her. Rust listened to her attentively. Roa said that switching between transparency and long-range viewing modes is very smooth. The girl continued to say that switching by voice is very convenient, but manually is somehow more pleasant, or something. Rust told her that he understood everything. The guy thought that she wanted to tell him that, in the heat of battle, physical switching shows itself better. Roa said that she holds a spear with her right hand, so she would like to do everything with her left hand, if possible. Rust held out his hand to her and said that he understood everything. She can give him her artifact, that he will fix everything here. The guy unfolded the scroll and spoke to begin the census of the magic scheme. He said that to redistribute all the functions located on the right to the left side. Rust gave her the glasses and told her that everything was ready. Roa happily put it on and ran into the pond to fight a few more monsters. Ari looked at her sister and said with a smile that Roa was so happy. The girl abruptly grabbed her monocle and thrust her spear forward. She said she was sorry to Rust for bothering her. Suddenly, a salmon jumped out of the pond and planted itself on Ari's spear. Rust was surprised to think that the armored salmon was specifically aiming at Ari's spear. Was that really so? Rust went on to argue that, no, it's not like that. Ari predicted where he would attack from with her magical eye that sees the future. The girl smiled happily. Rust looked at her and thought that the two of them could tell they were sisters. She's so joyful. Ari looked at him carefully, and then made an offended face. The guy awkwardly thought that her magic eye worked not only in combat. She saw a future in which he inadvertently spoke out, and probably it was like that. Ari said no. Rust was shocked to think that she was actually reading his mind. The girl smiled and replied that he wasn't exactly wrong in that sense. Her face became very sweet. Meanwhile, the action moves on to Leheilsum. It is located in the association building. It was very big. He was at a reception with the head of the association. Leheilsum angrily asked the head what he really wanted him to return this Rasta. This should not be done in any case. Leheilsum was furious. You just got rid of the annoying guy, and then he'll come back again. His life was just starting to get better without Rust's presence. The head hit the table and angrily told Mr. Lehalesam to look at all these reports. Parliament sends them to them every day. Everyone writes the same thing. The man continued that either apologies or transmutations fail due to the poor quality of the original materials, or reports that they do not meet deadlines due to delays in the supply of materials, and customers are simply asking for huge compensation. The head turned around in his chair and said that all the punches from other heads of branches were falling on his head. He is asked to respect the agreements. The heads of the branches were constantly shouting and pouring out, but he did nothing. He asked Lehalesam that he remembered his words. The man's eyes widened in surprise. The man said that Lehalesam had said that nothing would change if Master Rust left, but how would he explain the current state of affairs? Lehalesam lowered his head sullenly. The head knocked on the table again and shouted that he was not only unable to replace Rust, but also harming the entire association. He explains his words by saying that there are huge holes in the walls all over the building, and the smell of this slime still hasn't gone away. The walls of the association were indeed sealed with simple pieces of wood. They did not hide the ugliness of the walls, but on the contrary, thanks to them all the flaws were very clearly visible. Lehalesam lowered his head slightly in great embarrassment. The man, not knowing what to say, began to mumble. The man, gathering his thoughts, replied that he was still against returning the Rasta. He clenched his fist in anger. He didn't even mention that as soon as he left, their sales reached a historical record in the country. Lehalesam added that the magic crystals of a new sample recently delivered. The head interrupted him and shouted that he knew this very well. The man went on to say that he had appointed him in charge in order to fill the gap that appeared after the departure of the Rasta master. If he is unable to handle it, then he will force him to personally beg him to return to the association. Lehalesam managed to contain his anger. He told the head that it was fine and he understood everything. The man angrily thought that it was all Rust's fault. He will never forget it, and he will never forgive it. Lehalesam angrily opened the door of the Department of Weapons Alchemy. People were sitting in the ruined hall, as the head said, that there were holes everywhere that spoiled the image of the association. The workers looked at him and wearily thought that he was in a bad mood. They will pretend that they did not notice anything and continue to work as if nothing had happened. Lehalesam sat down at his desk, which didn't look new for a long time. There were a couple of books on it, which did not help to create the solidity of this place. Everything looked abandoned. Sabas quickly entered the department and shouted loudly to Master Lehalesam that they had big problems. The man looked at the guy in disbelief and wearily asked what the rush was, why he was in such a hurry right now. The guy complained that most of the newly imported magic crystals of the new sample had been returned. Lehalesam stared at him in amazement, not believing his words. He shouted loudly that it was definitely some kind of mistake. Sabas pointed to the boxes and told Master Lehalesam to look for himself. The man looked in shock at the whole pyramid of boxes that were returned due to marriage, because traces of this fetid mucus were found in them. The boxes were huge, which meant that there were a lot of returns. Lehalesam loudly asked Sabas what he didn't understand. They had been paid for. The guy replied that he had no idea what had happened. The man shouted for his employees to contact the wholesalers immediately. Lehalesam was approached by an uncertain Tortake. He angrily asked the guy what he knew about it. Tortake replied fearfully that no, nothing had happened today. He asked what they would do with all this mess. The guy hesitantly added that they can't just take it all and throw it away. Lehalesam shouted angrily, which of course he didn't. This is their main source of income in the association. They should not lose it. Lehalesam continued to shout for them to go to the vault. They have to throw out everything that seems old. And then they need to make room and put all this new stuff in there. He will find out where these crystals are supposed to go. One of the employees asked what they should do. He was told that they had no choice. They had to go to the nearest storage facility. The girl asked that they really should throw something away just because it looks old. The guy replied that it looked like it. Warehouses also fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Weapons Alchemy. Someone said that if they cleaned up a bit, everything should fit. They entered a room in which there were large cabinets with various items. Everything really looked dirty and not cleaned, but it is unlikely that this was really unnecessary association. Skani asked if they would throw out those old wooden crates. She looked at the shelves and pointed to one of the many drawers. She asked what was in it. She was told that they did not know, The inscription was too erased. She took it in her hands and said with a smile that it was something left over from the impoverished Department of Elementary Research. She added that if it were important, it wouldn't have so much dust on it. The girl went to another drawer and asked, a little interested, what was there. Skinny took a bottle of liquid out of the drawer. The girl shook it and said that it was a colorless, transparent liquid. Tortake held a pendulum to the water and said that there was a reaction to the magical elements. He went on to say that, since it was something colorless and transparent, it must be defective potions. Skinny said with a laugh that they even kept something so useless. It must have been very bad in that department. The girl asked if they could throw it all away. One of the employees asked uncertainly if they would consult with Masterly Halesome first. Tortake replied wearily that he didn't. He imagined the Lehylises shouting that they couldn't do anything without a pointer. The guy said that he would just go broke again. Tortake asked Skinny to pour it all into the river. In the meantime, they will move the boxes, and then they will start bringing in magic crystals. They still have a lot of work to do. Skinny replied that she would do everything, but for now she would just close it. It was written on the back of the lid that it was a concentrated solution of magical elements, to be handled with extreme care. Rust used this concentrated solution very often in the early stages of his elementary research. Skinny shouted that she would carry the box to the river with the help of a transmuted beast. The girl started pouring the solution into the water. Magical elements are harmless to humans. If you pour the solution into the river, nothing will happen to people. However, there is another side. The lack of primary damage means that no one will notice the mistake made by Cake and the others until it's too late. The fish was happily splashing in the river, but very soon it will change its place of residence. Now everyone is in the Alchemists Association, the communication room. A huge number of different magical devices were placed all over the room. Sabas picked up the report and said in shock that he just couldn't believe it. The guy couldn't believe that he had to read it now. It's not very good. Lei Halesome ran into the office and angrily asked Sabasa what was there. The guy looked at the master in fright. Lei Halesome was angry because of his assistant's scared look. Lee Hylasam shouted for him to give him a report. The man did not wait for action from Sabas and tore the piece of paper out of his hands himself. He couldn't wait to find out what it was. The man took the paper in his hands and began to quickly run through the text with his eyes. As he read, his face became more and more scared. He looked at Sabas, but the guy just nodded. By this action, the guy made it clear that everything is really as it is written in the report. Lee Halesome said in disbelief that the magic crystals, apparently old-style magic crystals, have entered the market. Moreover, there are a lot of them. But this is impossible. He shouted and shot that this could not be, and he did not believe in what was written. He said that the import was completely blocked. That leaves only contraband, but there are too many of them. Maybe someone is doing it here, although it's just not possible. Lei Halesome shouted that if one of the alchemists in the association had given them such a pig, he would have been immediately kicked out by their association. The man continued to shout that there should be no alchemists without a license with this level of skills. Lei Halesome stopped abruptly and thought that Rust had left the association. He thought, almost crying, that it was definitely Rust. He lowered his eyes to the floor. Sabas told his master that, in any case, their crystals of the new sample continue to be returned. At this rate, they'll be left with a bunch of unsold goods. People turned around to see what was going on there. They didn't likely hear some screams. Some guy whispered angrily that they had some kind of mess there. Lee Halesome loudly asked what was going on with the sales. Sabas replied that they had managed to recover a little. The guy said that they are in the absolute red. The man looked at Sabas in horror. Lee Halesome asked in shock that they are now in the red. He shouted loudly that it couldn't be. It just can't happen. He doesn't want to believe it. It couldn't happen. The man angrily thought that he would have to shove his pride deeper and ask Rust to come back. The last thing he wants to do is do it. Lee Halesome shouted that he would not do it for anything. The man clenched his hands at the thought that he would have to meet Rust again and then ask him for help. A guy came into the room and called for Master Lei Halesome. The man turned to hear what was wanted of him. The guy said that his boss was calling him, and he seemed very angry. Lee Halesome cleared his throat. Terrified, he told Sabas to do something. The guy asked in surprise what he could do. He's an ordinary worker. Sabas said wearily that he thought there was nothing he could do about it. Lei Helsum shouted at the entire association that he had big problems and did not know what to do. The man said the name Rasta several dozen times in his head. The guy sneezed loudly at this time because Lee Hylasam had not stopped thinking about him for some time. Lei Helsum and several others were walking through a clearing that led into the forest. It was very hot at that time. They were eating with their feet. The man couldn't believe he was in such a situation, but it was an order. Lee Hylasam recalls how he came to the office of the head. The man loudly said that he had to personally return the Rasta. Lee Hylasam looked at the head in surprise. He could not believe that he had actually heard this. The head of state added that he was obliged to take responsibility for all that had happened. Lee Helsum clenched his hands into a fist, but did not respond to the head of his statements. That's how he ended up in the forest. Lee Hylasam thought angrily that he even had to pay his escorts out of his own pocket. Lee Hylasam looked at his company and thought that it was just a bunch of incompetents who couldn't even fight properly, but it was better than nothing. One of the guys shouted to Lee Helsum that he wanted to ask for something. The man angrily asked what he wanted from him. The guy asked that he was sure they were going the right way. There were trees and plants all around, but it was still a little dangerous to walk through the forest. Lee Helsum looked at the forest path and answered uncertainly, most likely yes. He angrily told his colleagues not to think about it. The man asked that they understand what they have to do. The man gave the guys a weapon so they could use it for protection. Lee Hylasam said that these things have magic cycles built into them that change their element. They were made by him personally. One of the guys replied with an evil smile that, yes, they would do whatever Sir Lee Hylasam wanted. They're supposed to shoot this rust right in the back. He will serve it with a crispy crust. Lee Hylasam told them to listen to him carefully. First, you need to lure him out, and only then kill him. Then, you need to lure the monsters so that they eat his corpse. The man added that he must have a lot of money. He is sure that he is making old-style magic crystals. The two brothers looked at each other with a predatory smile. Lee Hylasam went on to say that they would split everything equally, so they should keep their mouths shut. The guy turned to the brothers and told Lee Hylasam that he could count on them. One of the brothers said that they would have problems with some kind of nerdy weakling. Lee Hylasam followed them so as not to be left alone in the forest. The man said angrily to himself that these guys were just terrible. He's hot. Feels like he's in a steam room. It's all Rust's fault that he had to go somewhere unknown, in an area where there are also a whole bunch of monsters. He remembered the words of the head and shouted that this president was also disgusting. He's too worried about saving face. He told him to tell him that he would raise his funding if he returned. The man added that this guy would come running back with tears in his eyes. A small monster appeared. He growled at Lee Helsum. The man jumped away from the monster in fright and shouted for Dean to come up to him and urgently help him cope with the problem. Dean approached Lee Helsum and asked what had happened. He looked down and saw a monster. The guy said he was just a little monster. There's nothing serious about it. Dean shouted to the brothers to figure it out. One of the brothers took out a gun and said that he would do everything now. The man approached the small monster and shot at it, easily killing it thereby. He laughed and told Dadin that it was too easy. The guy replied with a smile that yes, no one is a threat to them with these things, so everything will be fine. More and more monsters began to come out of the rocks. Deedon said with a smile that the next one would be his. They should not forget that in this region, many species are sensitive to sound. Deedon shouted to his friends to look ahead. The monsters themselves were crawling at them, as if they wanted them to shoot them. The guy looked at the monsters. He thought there would be fewer of them. One of the brothers asked fearfully that there weren't too many of them. Deedon shouted for them to start shooting at the monsters faster. Lee Hylasam stood behind them. He shouted for them to stop. They need to replace the magic circuits. The man thought that changing the elements consumed too much magic. Deedon said in horror that they were climbing and climbing. He started shooting quickly, but not all the bullets hit the target. He shouted in shock that there had been a misfire. But why? The men began to panic as there are more and more monsters. They began to act. Rust mentioned it once. He said that the new type often misfires. Deedon shouted loudly that there were more and more of them. He shouted to his brothers to shoot at last. One of the brothers said that he already knows everything. He tried to get out several times, but nothing happened. The guy screamed in fright that the magic elements had run out. They started shouting at Lehalesome at the same time that they had run out of crystals, and someone's gun was broken. He must give them spare crystals and a magic cannon. Lehalesome angrily shouted that he had no spare crystals. The guys looked at him in shock. They couldn't believe that Master Lehalesome hadn't taken the crystals. They looked at their guns. Suddenly, they quickly ran away from the monsters. Lehalesome angrily shouted after them to stop. He asked where they were going. The man looked at the monsters that were already near his feet. Lehalesome shouted furiously that he would have to deal with these monsters himself. He unfolded the scroll and shouted loudly for the activation to begin. A light appeared around him. Then there is a spatial connection between them. The path will merge with his flesh. Parasitic beast number 1 is a destroyer. Lehalesome grimaced in pain. His hand began to turn into a viscous slime from which dozens of mushrooms grow. The man shouted loudly that these pitiful insects were about to receive a visit in pure anger. 30 years ago, Lehalesome was a handsome but gloomy man. For some reason, back then, all of Lehalesom's transforming beasts were parasitic fungi fusing with his body. It was terrible, but it was his only way of attacking. Because of this, Lehalesome simply hated participating in battles. He started fighting monsters with the help of parasitic fungi that sprayed their spores around. The monsters began to catch them and fall to the ground. Mushrooms began to sprout from them, which killed monsters. They couldn't fight with their own body, which was dying because of these mushrooms. Lehalesome looked at the clearing, which was completely covered with parasitic fungi. The monsters kept coming at him anyway. They replaced their brothers who died. The man noticed and began to strike with his hand. He shouted loudly for them to get it. Lehalesome destroyed monsters over and over again. He shouted loudly that one by one, they would die. One monster began to crawl up from behind to Lehalesome. The man did not notice him. He raised his foot to step on another monster, but suddenly, he was bitten on the thigh. Lehalesome grabbed his hip and screamed loudly in pain. The monster wasn't going to let go of him. It stuck tightly to his leg to do as much damage as possible. The man looked at the monster in horror and thought that he had just bitten him. He continued to wave his foot. Lehalesome hit the monster with all his might, and it flew off the man's hip, already dead. Lehalesome glared at the torn clothes, which now gave an overview of the wound. The monster really hurt the man badly, and it was also very painful for him. The man thought wearily that the potion should help. Lehalesome hit the monsters one last time. They carefully examined the ground so as not to miss anyone. Lehalesome said that it seemed like everything. The monsters were over. The man began to transform his hand back into a human one. He moaned in pain until it was over. He shouted very angrily that it was all the fault of the terrible Rasta. However, no one heard him because he was all alone in the forest. Lehalesome opened the potion and drank it. He wiped his face. The man was tired after the battle. Lehalesome added that when he comes to Rust, he will be overjoyed, of course. He was called back to the association, but he will kill him. He took a step and then shouted that his leg hurt. Lehalesome knew there was nothing he could do about it. He will have to walk, despite the pain he feels. Lehalesome walked along the path and wailed angrily that Rust would pay for everything. Rust approached the behemoth and said with a smile that it was time for them to go. Today, he plans on one of the main duties of an alchemist. The guy thought that one of the main tasks was the development of the regions. Silhouettes of tents could be seen in the distance. The guy says that they have to remove magic elements from the soil, which the farmers will work on afterwards. He said that the grain would not grow in soil with a high concentration of magical elements, so they must be removed from the soil and dispersed in the atmosphere. Rust dug a small hole. He thought that he would have to dig holes in this roughly plowed kidney, from which all the stones had previously been removed, and they should be the right size to fit his hands there. The guy said that the ground was a little hard, but he could handle it. Rust felt the behemoth push him a little. He looked at him. The guy asked if he wanted to switch. Rust asked what he could dig where he was showing. The hippopotamus made an affirmative noise and began to dig a hole quickly with the help of his paw. The guy shouted joyfully that he was a great fellow. Behemoth continued to dig holes until Rust said that was enough. He is very grateful to Hypopolpo. The beast looked at its master with interest. He wanted to know what would happen next. Rust took an onion out of his pocket and said that now he needed to bury these transmutated bulbs. The guy thought they needed to extract the elements from the soil. He put an onion in the pit. The behemoth made sad noises. Rust stroked him and said with a laugh that he understood everything. It was too difficult for a hippo. But he thanked his friend anyway. Rust unfolded the scroll and said with a smile that there should be no leaks. Start activation and start collecting magic elements. A magic sign appeared above the scroll. The same magical signs appeared above all the pits with the bulb. Rust happily said that everything was going very well. He touched the scroll, which sparkled with magic. Rust said that everything was fine. Now you just need to pump out too many elements. The bracelet on his arm began to fall off. The guy looked at him. When they returned from testing the artifacts, Roa gave the bracelet to him. The girl told him that it was all thanks to that artifact. She will give him a charm, such as they make in her hometown. Rust smiled and asked if she had woven it herself. Roa lowered her eyes and blushed. The girl nodded. She said that if you need it, you can cut it off. Rust looked at the bracelet again and thought that he was so glad that Roa had made it for him. But what kind of amulet if it could be cut off? He leaned against the behemoth and raised his arm with the bracelet. The guy said that it would take some time, and in order to pass it somehow, he would read the papers of his predecessor. Rust took out a scroll of notes and said that here they were. He thought it was a comparative study of the concentration of magical elements in the soil and the millet growing on it. Before leaving, he transferred all the records remaining in the Department of Basic Research into this scroll. Rust went on to say that he was sure that Lee Hylason would throw everything away. He touched the scroll and said that there was something very interesting written here. The guy thought that if you leave a few magical elements in the soil, the food will taste better to people. Here is the theory that the human brain is falsely stimulating the centers of taste sensation. Rust said that her taste would not change in any way. This interesting study is related to the effects of magical elements on the human body. The behemoth mumbled something in his own language. He said in surprise that it was time. He said he was grateful to Behemoth for telling him. Rust praised the behemoth. The concentration is just perfect. Suddenly, he heard Ari calling out to him. The girl quickly ran up to him. Rust asked in surprise what had happened. The girl replied that someone was looking for him. The girl said a little excitedly that she thought this was not a very good person. He has to be careful. The guy was surprised that this man was not very good. He asks the girl if he told her his name. Ari, out of breath from running, replied positively. The girl tells him that he said his name was Lee Hylasam. The man was smiling very angrily. Rust said that Lee Hylasam had come and it was good that she found out his name. He asked Ari what she could tell him in more detail while they were on the road. The guy thought he had a bad feeling about it. Rust held out his hand to Ari. The girl looked at him in surprise, but still held out her hand to him. He grabbed her tighter and told her to let him help her. Rust quickly dragged Ari onto the behemoth, so it would be faster than walking to the camp. The guy looked at her and told her to hold on tight. The hippo would take them for a ride with the breeze. Ari blushed, but hugged Rasta tightly from behind so as not to fall. The behemoth quickly ran into the camp. Ari pressed her cheek against Rust's back. The girl thought that they were driving fast, but quiet and comfortable, even though they were driving through the wastelands. She continued to reason that the beast was deliberately adjusting its speed so that they wouldn't shake. The guy told Ari that he was his old colleague from the Alchemists Association. He was constantly coming up with troubles on his head. Probably he was not satisfied with something all the time. Rust went on to say that he was probably here because of the magic crystals. He had assumed that this could happen, but it came faster than he expected. Ari listened attentively to the guy. She did not notice how her face became sad from this. The girl looked very thoughtful. She was worried about something, but she didn't say it out loud. Rust asked with a smile that something was bothering her. The girl replied uncertainly that she did not see it clearly. The future will be such that there is a battle ahead of them, and it will not be easy. Ari went on to say that she feels that a battle is coming, which can be called a full-scale war. The visions keep appearing and disappearing. They continue on their way. The girl snuggled closer to Rust and said that the artifact he had made worked perfectly. Probably. It's only because of him that she can actually see this fight. Rust lived ahead and anxiously thought that Ari had answered his question without even letting him finish. It seems that there are no problems with the artifact, although everything is fine here. The guy sternly asked Ari if she wanted to say that she and Lee Halesome would arrange a fight. Ari sadly replied that she was almost sure of it, but it would be terrible. Rust asked the girl with interest that this was not all. Ari hesitantly replied that she didn't know. She's never felt like this before and it's scary. The girl added that she apologizes for this. Rust smiled at her and said that she had nothing to apologize for. He is very grateful to her for what she told him. Ari jerked her head up and screamed. Rust looked at her in surprise. He didn't understand what had happened. The girl seems to be looking through him. It's scary. The girl whispered that the bifurcation point was just around the corner. She's already here. The choice of the Rasta Master can be different. There are better and worse choices, but some will choose Rust. Ari continued to whisper that both options have the same probability of becoming the path that fate will take. Ari's eyes started to sparkle, but she didn't notice it. She was amazed by her vision. Fate gathers from the pieces and continues its code. She added that the wind was blowing, carrying the song of the wastelands. She sees two people, and then the shaman's hand. Rust was surprised to think that there were magical elements in Ari's eyes, and the monocle artifact was behaving strangely. He looked at his girlfriend in amazement. The processing speed has reached its limit, but the monocle is in full sync with Ari's magic eye. The guy continued to argue that Ari's eyes are capable of seeing the future. It's truly amazing, but how far into the future she can look? Ari sat back abruptly. The girl couldn't stand the vision and closed her eyes. She started to fall backwards, but Rust saw it and managed to catch her. The guy looked at her in fright. He doesn't understand what happened. Rust shouted loudly for Ari to hold on. The girl was unconscious, so she did not hear Rust's screams. She continued to be in a dream for several minutes. The girl began to recover a little. She wearily called Rasta and said that she was very grateful to him, but she was really fine now, so there was no need to worry. Rust was surprised to think that the vision of the future seemed to have stopped. Ari's magic eye loads her body more than he thought, so she lost consciousness. The guy told her not to worry and everything was fine. Rust confidently said that whatever fate prepared for him, no matter what it brought, he would protect everyone. Rust awkwardly said that they were, after all, a family. Ari looked at him in surprise and then hugged him tightly. She blushed and whispered that he was right. The guy blushed and coughed. He felt a little awkward. Rust said that they needed to speed up and advised Ari to hold on tight, because now they would go at full speed. Roa ran up to them and shouted that they needed to go there. Rust replied that it was fine. The guy helped Ari down. He asked her what she was going to do now. She'd better rest, she's not feeling well. The girl confidently replied that she would also go with him to support him. Ari added that she wanted to see for herself. Rust looked at her and smiled. They walked together to Lee Halesome. Roa told Mr. Rust to be careful. She feels evil in him. The guy was surprised to think that there was evil in him. She saw something in him with her power of insight. It's just unbelievable, but he'll listen to the advice. Karin was standing in front of Lee Halesome. She was wearing armor. Karin, the heavy knight, her special super heavy armor made of meteorite iron is not for protection. The point is to make Karin's bag and, accordingly, her attacks harder. Karin turned her head in his direction and said with a smile that he had finally come. Rust replied with a smile that he was sorry for keeping her waiting. Suddenly, his face changed, and he glared at Lee Halesome, who was watching him. They stood opposite each other. Lee Halesome looked very worried and angry. Rust thought it was really him, an alchemist with the rank of master. Karin will have a hard time dealing with him because she specializes in direct collision. Rust put his hand in front of Karin. The girl looked at him in surprise. He blocked her with his back and said that he would figure it out on his own. She can leave it to him. Lee Halesome tried to make something like a smile. He said that he was finally glad to see Master Rust. He had been getting to him for a very long time, and now he was here. Rust asked what he owed to Master Lee Halesome's visit, and also what the smell was. Lee Halesome spoke so that Master Rust would listen and rejoice. The Association of Alchemists decided to officially resume the activities of the Department of Basic Research, and the president gave him the opportunity to work again in the prestigious Association of Alchemists. He asked Rust if he was happy with the news, because it was an honor for him. The man said that now he could go with him and held out his hand forward. Rust looked at him in shock and replied that he had never in his life. He's never coming back. Lee Halesome, not believing what Rust had just said, opened his eyes in amazement and stared at the young man in surprise. Rust said that he left because he wanted to leave. Yes, of course, it all started with the dissolution of the Department of Basic Research. But it seems to him that this is where he was able to advance his scientific research. The guy added that if that was all he wanted to say, then he was asking him to leave. Karen nodded her head in satisfaction. The girls were watching Lee Halesome closely. The man began to giggle. Rust looked at him intently. Then the man started laughing hysterically, very loudly, throwing his head back. Karen, Roa, and Ari took out their weapons to defend themselves if he decided to attack. Lee Halesome smiled broadly. The man said that if so, then there was nothing to be done. It has no other options. He added that it was true. There was not a single option. They'll just destroy it. Rust looked in surprise at the man who started attacking him and the girls. He shouted loudly for the activation to begin, and Ari, Roa, and Karen moved away. Scrolls appeared that covered him and the girls. They became shields. Rust angrily shouted at Lee Halesome that he knew that alchemist masters were forbidden to fight to the death. He thought Ari had warned him. Lee Halesome suddenly changed. The guy realized that the matter was serious and shouted that Lee Halesome would at best be stripped of his alchemist's license. He asked him if he didn't understand that. Rust was just furious at the man's actions. Lee Halesome turned his hand into a goo with poisonous mushrooms. He became like a madman. The man said angrily that he would not leave any witnesses. Suddenly, arguments began to pour in. They touched the ground and turned into mushrooms. Rust covered his nose with his hand and was shocked to think that these were spores. It could be dangerous. The guy held out his hand in front of Ari and Roa so they wouldn't get any closer. He shouted that they were transformed beasts of the slime mold archetype. You need to keep your distance, and in no case inhale the spores. The mushrooms, which instantly grew, began to rise from the ground with the help of the hands that they had. Roa was shocked to see that the mushrooms had grown limbs. Rust thought in disbelief that these were independent transformed animals. By themselves, he doesn't seem to be very strong, but there are a lot of them, and considering that he is dealing with Lee Halesome, they are also definitely poisoned. He continued to reason that he needed to deal with them in one fell swoop. The guy put his hands out. Several scrolls appeared in front of him and stood in front of the mushrooms. He said he was sorry, but he would have to get rid of them. A small tornado appeared on Rust's arm. The guy spoke loudly to start grinding. Rust was preparing to launch an attack on the poisonous mushrooms that appeared thanks to Lee Halesome. Roa asked if it was the same thing he used to create magic crystals. Rust spoke loudly so that the blow was at full power. His target was the grinding scroll. He looked angrily at the little enemies and shouted for the limit to be released. Rust put all his strength into the tornado that struck the monsters. The mushrooms began to fly away and fly into small pieces. They didn't have enough strength to stand up against the tornado of Rust, but they continued to try to get to the guy. Rust thought angrily that he needed to chop them into small pieces, because he did not know what these transformed beasts were capable of. The guy continued to hold the tornado. Karen, Roa, and Ari watched Rust struggle. They looked confident. The girls couldn't imagine that Master Rust could lose, but they were worried about him anyway. The mushrooms began to scatter in different directions. They were running and bumping into each other. The monsters were not good at bypassing Rust's attacks, but some just stood there and accepted their fate. Rust created a magic sign and touched it. He thought they should be thrown away from the camp. Lee Halesome was covered in slime, which flew into him when the wind picked up. Ari told Roa that the crushed mushrooms were scattered everywhere due to the suction force of the tornado. The sister replied with a laugh that it turned out to be a mushroom smoothie. Lee Halesome watched as sand, slime, and porridge of mushrooms flew at him. He watched tiredly as his entire body sank into the liquid, and then his entire face disappeared under a layer of goo. Rust thought that he was very interested that he had managed to break all the mushrooms. He stopped summoning tornadoes and looked at the battlefield to see everything with his own eyes. The guy screamed in shock when he saw what came out after his attack. Lee Halesome is completely covered with a strange substance. Rust could only see one of the man's eyes and several with his finger. Karen leaned on her sword and happily said that Rust was merciless, as always. One of the sisters screamed that everything had happened so quickly. He's so strong, even though it's Rust. She was told that it was simply unimaginable. Rust listened to the compliments that the girl was saying. He looked very proud that he was able to deal with so many monsters. Rust rolled up the scroll and awkwardly thought that he wanted to sink through the ground. Lee Hyla-sam began to scream and cough from the sand that got into his mouth. He began to dig himself out slowly. Lee Hyla-sam looked like a sandman. He was able to free his mouth. The man sighed angrily and began to shout loudly. Lee Hyla-sam hysterically said that all his mushrooms were gone. How dare Rust do such a thing? He looked just disgusting right now. You couldn't even think that he was an alchemist. It was just disgusting for Rust to watch his former colleague. Karen looked puzzled. She didn't understand what was going on at all. The sisters' faces were hidden behind masks, but they were still very interested. Lee Hyla-sam was able to free his hand from the muck. He summoned a scroll that had 2 magic seals on it. The scroll was surrounded by black smoke, which showed that it was being used for evil. Rust looked at Lee Hyla-sam's actions and anxiously thought that it was a declaration scroll. The man touched one of the seals, and it began to form a huge mushroom. Smoke began to pour out of the giant mushroom. It covered the entire battlefield. Rust wondered if it was really a smokescreen. Although, no, it doesn't look like it. The guy went on to argue that gas is heavier than air, so it spreads quickly over the ground. But then what is it? As well as how it will act. Rust looked at the place where Lee Hyla-sam should have been. The unknown smoke began to disappear, and Lee Hyla-sam could be seen, who began to run away quickly. Rust said wearily that he had just run away. Karen wearily asked why he had come at all then. Roa shouted loudly that they should run after him. The guy shouted loudly that no, she had to stop. It's definitely some kind of poison. Rust summoned the scroll again and shouted loudly for the activation to begin, and then the release of the limit. Rust thought that despite these strange actions, Lee Hyla-sam can still be an alchemist with the rank of master. He can really do something very scary. The guy touched the seal and spoke to begin the purification. Several magical signs surrounded the mushroom in its poisonous smoke. It was closed as if under a dome. Ari said that this space seemed somehow distorted. Russ replied that it was needed to separate gases. He told him about it, so don't get too close. Rust looked at the mushroom carefully and added that it probably needed a lot of concentration. The guy thought that first he needed to separate the gases and give each a spherical shape. He went on to speculate that there would be pure oxygen in one of the bubbles. Rust shouted loudly for the activation to begin. The guy thought that he should take another step later. He spoke to make the projection happen. Rust thought that he needed to warm it up with sunlight. A glass appeared above the mushroom, which amplified the sunlight. The guy thought that a chance with a high concentration of oxygen under the influence of heating would cause a surge of thermal energy. That's what happened now. Roa said it smelled interesting, but she accidentally inhaled. The guy took out a jar and started collecting all the smoke into it to protect the air. Russ thought that this purple gas seemed to be poisonous, so he would collect it in a jar with a cleansing effect. He rolled to the scroll and said loudly that everything was ready now. Roa said that now they should go after Lee Hyla-sam. He's exactly ahead. Rust looked at Karen and shouted that he would go after Lee Hyla-sam now, especially since Roa could see very far. Ari screamed at Rust to look back. There's something coming. Rust looked at the sky in surprise and saw black dots in the distance that were approaching. Roa used her power to get closer and see what kind of creatures they were. She saw that these were monsters that looked like huge fish that could fly. The girl screamed loudly that there was an armored salmon with wings. They attack because they have evolved. Rust was shocked to think why this was happening right now. Rust looked ahead and wondered fearfully what he should do now. He must run after Lee Hyla-sam or help the others defend the camp. Karen shouted loudly that there were heavenly salmon ahead. The girl shouted at Ari and Rawa to go ahead. Karen continued to shout at them to try to restrain them and assess how dangerous they were. She will take over the leadership of the soldiers and the evacuation of non-combatant personnel. The girl added that the main thing is to stay alive. Everything else is secondary. Karen closed her eyes and was silent for a few seconds. She considered her actions. Karen looked at Rust and shouted loudly that Master Rust would go after Lee Hyla-sam. She would accept any decision he made. The guy looked at her in surprise. The guy listened to Karen's words and sighed in shock. He had not expected such an order from her. Rust thought uncertainly that his instincts were whispering for him to chase Lee Hyla-sam. The guy continued to argue that this is the turning point that Ari was talking about. He must pursue Lehalesum or stay to defend the camp. Rust closed his eyes and thought that Karen and the others were not very good against flying enemies. At this time, the heavenly salmon were getting closer and closer. He squeezed his hand. Rust thought that a horde of enemies would attack from the sky. They have hard scales because of this. Without alchemy and magic items, the battle will acquire an absolute defensive manner, and there will be many victims. He clenched his fist. Rust clenched her hands into fists and continued to argue that the victims of the composition of the camp or let Lehalesum go. In fact, there is only one reason why alchemists with the rank of master are forbidden to fight each other. The guy thought that if they fought at full strength, the fight was very likely to take on a large scale. The rule does not exist to protect the alchemists themselves, but for the sake of the people around them. Rust reasoned that if he decided to attack in full force, the threat would seriously increase. Callan understands this. She is a feudal lord. Her main priority is to protect the camp, but she left the choice to him. Rust told her that he understood everything. The guy put his hand on his chest and said that he would defend the camp. Karen looked closely into Rust's eyes. The guy thought that by looking into Karen's eyes, he understood something. If there are casualties because of her decision to chase Lehalesum, she will carry this sadness and regrets herself. After all, she's in charge of this place. Rust continued to reason that she would keep these emotions to herself. He smiled and told Karen that they would deal with Lehalesum later. He's definitely coming back. Karen looked at him in surprise, but then smiled. She said it was great. The Rust Master must prepare to destroy the heavenly salmon. He shouted loudly that he understood everything. Rust smiled and thought that he had to destroy, and she wanted a lot, so he would try not to let her down. He has to do it. She ran to Rust and shouted loudly that Master Rust should not do this. He must pursue Lee Sol-sam. The girl clutched her eye and she sounded very worried. Rust looked at her in surprise. Karen shouted sternly at Ari to shut up. In battle, only she gives orders. Now she must go and do her duty. Ari lowered her head. She replied that she would follow Madam's orders. They will go ahead. Rust looked after her and thought that he was very sorry for that. He continued to reason that he believed in the future she had seen. At his old job, he became completely passive. He did not notice it himself. He could just stare at the ceiling for hours. Rust thought that he had been given the opportunity to choose his future. He felt trust and hope. The guy stared after Ari for a few more seconds, and then ran to the battlefield. He ran with the thought that he wanted to protect something that would be impossible to replace. What Karen and the girls gave him, like the rest of the camp residents, he will never forget. The heavenly salmon were already flying over the camp. Rust stopped and looked at Stoya. He thought that the heavenly salmon were divided into two groups. One is heading towards the camp, and the other, perhaps, to the capital. The guy hesitantly added that it was probably even good, but he wondered why they should go to the capital. Rust noticed how Ari and Roa were trying to hit one of the salmon with their spears. He ran towards them loudly and shouted that he was coming towards them. The girls confidently shouted that Master Rust did not need to do this. They all know how to fight. They will definitely do it. Rust stopped and looked at them in surprise, but then he smiled proudly. He shouted that he only had one question. The guy asked where the other people were. The girls replied that they were answered in the food storage. Rust thought that was understandable. The enemy is attacking from the sky, so underground storage is just a great choice. The guy told Ari and Roa that it was good. He's counting on them. Rust turned and headed for the tent. He thought they had no right to waste time. He ran into his room and quickly began to collect various bottles of potions. He opened the scrolls and poured everything on them. Rust shouted for the rapid transmutation to begin. Potions began to become magical signs, and then imprinted on paper. Rust performed these actions with each of his potions. He was afraid to forget something. He shouted for the gravity restriction to be released. Its purpose is to concentrate a solution of magical elements. Start creating 9 balls. Balls filled with liquid appeared next to the magic signs. Rust thought that these were the highest quality materials, but now is not the time to skimp. Rust looked at the scroll and thought wearily that, according to his own rule, he was trying to save money, and he was also trying to make the most of everything. He's using very valuable materials now. The guy confidently said that he would do more later. Rust thought that if he could save the campers, it would be worth it. The guy began to get tired before his eyes. He thought that rapid transmutation required high concentration, like wielding a needle, and he had several objects at once. This is very difficult to do. Rust grabbed her arm to hold her back. He said wearily that there was still a little bit left. The guy thought that if he lost his concentration, everything would be for nothing. He continued to argue that he did not have the materials for another attempt. The head of Rasta began to close. He tried to keep them open, but his body wouldn't obey. He thought in horror that this was a disaster. The ego state is getting worse and worse. His consciousness is slipping away from him. Karen, Roa, Aaron, and all the villagers who were standing nearby appeared in front of Rasta's eyes. The guy opened his eyes abruptly. He screamed loudly and squeezed his hand harder so that she would continue to hold the potion balls. He couldn't let it all be sold for nothing. Rust exhaled joyfully and thought that it was very close. He almost fainted. The guy looked carefully at the scrolls, which shone white. The guy thought that he was creating scrolls to fight flying enemies. The scrolls are made of magic stones, magic stream. It usually takes a lot of materials and time to create even one scroll. Rust ended his thought by saying that he creates 9 at once, and this is very difficult. The 9 scrolls flew into the air and then headed straight for Rust's hands. He thought it was finally ready. Rust noticed the bracelet that Roa had given him. He remembered her words. She said that if you need it, you can cut it off. Rust picked it up and said he was grateful to her. Rust looked at the exit of the tent and then clutched the amulet in his hand. He went to help his friends. The guy thought that he hoped that no one had been hurt yet. Rust ran into the square. Many heavenly salmon attacked circled in the sky. They attacked Karen, who was waiting for them with a smile. She used her armor to hide her face. Rust could see her bloodthirsty smile. She began to quickly destroy the monsters. The guy could only see the parts of the salmon that fell to the ground after meeting Karen's blade. Rust said admiringly that it was amazing. He thought he had just seen Karen's jet black armor. He thought about it and realized that she even got her nickname because of them. Karen threw at the monsters. Rust said loudly that she was such a war heroine. She's like a jet black rabid bull. The guy was shocked to think that she was just rushing into them. He watched the battle between Karen and the heavenly salmon. The guy reasoned that she was many times stronger than an ordinary person, but she lacked something, namely weight. Rust thought that the heavy patched armor, coupled with a huge sword, would offset this disadvantage. Karen gets heavier with the help of her armor and sword. Karan landed next to Rust. They left an impressive dent in the ground. The guy noticed this and was surprised to think that she was striking him with her strength. The girl asked with a smile that he was ready. Rust confidently replied that he was completely ready. Heavenly salmon flew in circles across the sky. They were tracking people. Karen shouted joyfully that he was fast, as always. She just managed to warm up. Rust replied that, if you look at it from the outside, she can handle them herself. The girl said that she would not be sure about it. She pointed at the dead monster. Karen told him to take a good look at the heavenly salmon. Rust looked at the ground and saw a monster. Karen said that if she just wakes up to destroy salmon, the caviar will fly all over the neighborhood, so everyone is counting on him. He has to help with this. Rust smiled broadly and replied that he understood everything. He will sweep them away in one fell swoop. The guy touched the scrolls to make sure they were in his possession. The guy threw the scrolls in the air and shouted that it was time for them to start. Rust spoke to activate the scroll. He said it 9 times so that all the scrolls would activate. Roa and Ari noticed bright flashes in the camp. Ari asked in surprise that this was the alchemy of Master Rasta. Karen ran up to them and shouted that they could take a break for now. Rust began to wait for a flock of salmon to fly closer. The guy thought that if he had a goal to tear them apart, he would use grinding. But they are now in the middle of the camp, so it will not end well. The guy continued to argue that these same scrolls are the opposite. Rust shouted loudly for it to manifest. A wall appeared in front of the pack, which should protect the rest. A rose began to sprout from the magic sign. The salmon crashed into the magic wall. The rose has entwined the whole flock with its vines. The monster screamed loudly in pain. Suddenly, the magic began to fade, but there was nothing in place of the monsters. It just disappeared. One would think that heavenly salmon never existed. Ari sighed in surprise. Roa smiled broadly. She radiated joy that the battle was over. Karen said it looked very impressive, but the main thing was that the monsters were gone. The vines of the rose began to disappear. Rust thought that somehow the scrolls of manifestation could be used. He used the return on the parts of the rose and moved them to another place. After that, he manifested them with the help of scrolls. Rust said with a smile that he was grateful to Rosa. Rust thought that the salmon had not gone anywhere. They are much bigger than the armored salmon he had seen before. As far as he can see from here, they can fly because of their developed fins. The guy continued to reason that their hard scales are made up of magical elements. Could it be that they fly at the expense of magical elements? He would like to find out. Russ said thoughtfully that it sounded very interesting. Rose touched the guy's face with her vine. The guy said that he was sorry. When the dust settled, he would conduct an autopsy. The guy added that Rosa would have to work hard. But let it be as it is. The rest of the salmon were flying over the camp, and it seemed they were going to fly to another place. Rust said with a smile that it was time to exterminate them. They were very annoying and dangerous, so they could harm someone if they attacked. Rust shouted loudly for the scrolls to fly apart. The wind picked up and the scrolls flew in different directions. The guy was watching them with a smile because soon the battle should come to an end. Meanwhile, let's take Lint. Sometimes he is responsible for storing food in the camp. Sometimes he's just a cook. Linta was fighting monsters with a huge axe, and several other people were doing it with him. He thought it had happened at the very beginning of the attack, in the food storage. He said wearily that there was no end in sight for monsters. A fight herself foe, a beastation. He said angrily that he was notifying Commander Lint that he would go ahead and distract them. Linta shouted with a smile that he wasn't. You can't break the circular formation, and he also wants to remind you that he is no longer in command. The guy continued to hit the monsters with a smile on his face. One of the heavenly salmon was approaching him. The guy started to wait for him with a smile, and when he was right under his nose, Linta shouted loudly for him to get it. Linta angrily said that these are terribly living creatures. They keep coming back and trying to attack them. It gets in the way. Warrior, ask them what they will do. He hit the monster and said that at this rate they would crush them. During the conversation, none of them stopped fighting. Linta scratched his cheek thoughtfully. He wondered what they should do. It seems that the situation is simply without a way out, but he has to come up with something and, as fashionable as possible, faster. He told the warrior that Lady Karen had told them to just hold on. The warrior wearily asked how much they should hold. They are already tired. It is not known how long they will last. Linta replied that they could only trust her. She's in charge, and her orders need to be corrected. The guy was really sure that Karen couldn't let them down. He added that they always did that. He doesn't want to think that they will act differently today. Linta never thought of disobeying Karen's orders, and now he won't. Linta raised the axe up and shouted at the people to listen to him carefully. They will be able to resist against these monsters. People shouted affirmatively. The heavenly salmon were approaching the earth again. Linta thought with an evil smile that he had certainly raised their morale. But the fight was going so-so. It was time to think about how they would retreat. Linta said confidently that he was counting on Lady Karen. The warrior shouted for the commander to look up. Linta shouted that he had said that he was not a commander. They should stop calling him that. The man asked what was in the sky. Linta looked up and noticed how the monsters were entwined with some vines. They began to disappear quickly with a loud scream. Lint was asked if this was a new monster in the sky. The guy looked closely at the strange picture in the sky. He confidently replied that no, it was not a new monster. Linta was shocked to say that it was devouring heavenly salmon. The guy heard someone shout loudly for the commander to pay attention to the monsters. They broke through. He turned his head and saw a whole bunch of monsters that started attacking people. People tried to fight off the salmon with the help of mines, but it turned out badly. Linta stood in front of the people and shouted loudly that the enemy was approaching. They have to keep formation. The guy grabbed the axe tighter and began to expect an attack. He looked at the monster that was already in front of his nose. Linta thought in horror that this was how he would end up. He can't believe he's going to die at the hands of a heavenly salmon. Suddenly, the remaining salmon were entwined with prickly vines. The monsters screamed loudly in pain. They tried to choose roses from the capture, but nothing worked. The vine held them very tightly. Linta stared in shock at the horror that was happening in front of him. He said in disbelief that vines grow from scrolls. They are most likely the work of the Rasta master. He continued to watch the salmon being swallowed by the vine. Linta said that all these salmon were torn apart in a second, but he didn't even take them with the commander's axe. The guy added that it was just creepy. People came up to Lint and started talking. One of the guys said in surprise that they were barely holding on. His friend replied that the alchemist masters were very scary creatures. Linta recovered from the shock and said uncertainly that everything was very strange. This carefree kid had such terrible techniques in stock. Linta looked at one of the soldiers and told him to report his losses. The man replied that he would tell you everything now. There are no fatalities, but a dozen are not seriously injured. They have bruises and scratches. Linta smiled and said he was glad to hear that. He couldn't have dreamed of a better one. The guy hesitantly said that he wanted to say something to the commander. Linta asked wearily how many times he had to be told not to call him that. The man sadly said that they were of no use. The guy looked at him in surprise and then looked away. Linta said he was just stupid. He asked who would have evacuated the civilians if they weren't here. Linta asked what would happen if the monsters broke through right away, how many people he thinks died. The guy was trying to convey their importance in this battle, because it really is. Linta looked up at the sky and said that to realize your weakness when you meet a great force, that's life. The warrior looked at him in surprise. The guy hit the warrior in the shoulder and laughingly told him not to worry. He should be glad that Master Rust is on their side. Each person has his own place, as well as his own business. Linta added that if any of them hadn't been here, the results would have been much worse. Someone shouted loudly for the commander to pay attention to the problems. Their mules were attacked. The guy asked in surprise what happened. Linta shouted loudly for a couple of volunteers to come up to him. He needs to finish what he started. Forward is the perfect defense. The warrior looked at Lint with a smile. He said that he would always be their commander. Now the sun could be easily seen in the sky. It was not covered by monsters. Lee Hylisim was walking through the woods. He was dripping with the liquid that had covered him during the battle with Rust. He was in torn clothes and also very tired from all the events. Disappointed, he wondered why this had happened to him. Shin's husband shuffled his feet heavily. Lee Hylisim was breathing heavily from every step. He was about to lose consciousness. The man thought that all this was because this disgusting guy came to the association. That's when everything went to hell. He could feel Rust's arrogant gaze. When Rust joined the association, he immediately said that he had been interested in alchemy since childhood. He wants to do basic research on magical elements. Lee Hylisim thought that everything about him infuriated him. It was utter nonsense. He said he liked alchemy. Lee Hylisim was a child and watched a mushroom that grew next to a flower. He joyfully shouted to his mother to look. A mushroom appeared, and yesterday there was nothing there. He went on to say that it was like alchemy. Maybe primitive creatures like mushrooms and alchemy. The woman interrupted and shouted loudly that it was disgusting. She kept yelling at him to get rid of it before it spread everywhere. Little Lee Hylisim wanted to object, but he was afraid of his mother. Janina told him to forget about it. She asked what he was doing today. Lee Hylisim looked at her for a few seconds, but not daring to say anything, he lowered his head. Lee Hylisim thought that his parents were exceptional alchemists. They constantly talked about how high their expectations were for him. He was going to become the youngest alchemist to become a master. The man thought that he had finally reached the head of the Department of Military Alchemy, but a Rust appeared. Everyone told him that he was the youngest master, a real genius. Lee Hylisim heard this and thought he was no genius. It was utter nonsense. He said angrily that this disgusting Rast would pay him for it. He won't forgive him. The man continued on his way through the forest. He gasped that he wasn't the only one. He will take revenge on everyone he knows. He swears that Rust will know despair. He humiliated him. Lee Hylisim went on to say that Rust was acting out of himself, who knows what, because he was lucky to be born talented. The man looked down. He said in horror what it was, looking at the leg. Lee Hylisim took out a potion and shouted that he had some nonsense. The man asked how he was lucky enough to be here. Lehelsom angrily shouted why his potion wasn't working. Maybe we need more. The man began to pour the remedy one by one on his foot. He decided that he would pour them all out. The man wondered why there was no result. It's very strange what to do. Suddenly, Lehelsom realized that the association must have high-quality potions. The main thing is to get there. He lifted his torn cloak and took out a scroll from his bosom. Lehelsom said he doesn't like to use this thing because his clothes always get dirty. The man raised his head and accepted that it was too late now. That it was too late to think about it. He unfolded the scroll and began to cast a spell. There was a spatial connection between them. Lehelsom continued. Cling to my flesh. Parasitic trans mutated beast number 4 is the king of Myxomycetes. An unusual white creature began to seep out of the scroll, which completely clung to Lehelsom. He was completely engulfed by the creature, and he ordered himself to be taken to the capital. The creature started up and abruptly began to move along the ground with the help of threads similar to legs. He said that he would carry him to the capital. Lehelsom was able to get to the capital after a while. Right in front of the castle, he shouted at the creature to stop and returned it to the scroll with the phrase, "Return." He abruptly ran to the open gate, thinking that he needed to get the potion as soon as possible. Normally, he would probably have been stopped by the guards, because he looks too suspicious. But, noticing the civilians and a large number of guards, he began to mumble that they were falling straight from the sky and looked like fish. The weapon did not take them at all. One of the guards asked what happened to the army. They need a rescue team right now. Suddenly, an unenlightened dark matter began to ooze out of Lehelsom's wound, which caused him pain. He thought that the Alchemists Association was literally around this corner, and a potion should be waiting for him there. The man walked around the corner and saw the destroyed building of the association, next to which people were running in a chaotic manner. Lehelsom did not understand where he came from. Maybe he was mistaken for the building. After all, it should be right here. Maybe he turned the wrong way. But it seems not. This is it. The building that he needs. He collapsed to the ground, realizing that this big pile of rubble and junk was the association building. It can't be. No. He devoted his whole life to her. She couldn't be destroyed so easily. An unknown person called out to Lehelsom. Is it really the famous master Lehelsom? Well. Suddenly, Lehelsom himself realized that they were in a barrier, because of which no one could see them. He grinned and pointed to Lehelsom's wound, said that he had an interesting thing there, turned his gaze to the building, and asked if this was really the Alchemists Association. It turned out to be a really interesting sight. A whole flock of heavenly salmon flew down from the sky, and they were flying exactly towards the association building. It was as if there was something hidden there that they really love. The unknown continued that, of course, the salmon attack was a coincidence, but a truly amazing coincidence. But then that infuriating swordswoman came, and so all the other buildings except this one were not damaged. He is very sorry that this happened. Lehelsom began to crawl back, accidentally falling backwards. He exclaimed who he was, what he was doing here. The unknown smiled and did not answer. The unknown laughed and said, "What the hell? Extraordinary. Uninteresting. It's also a man. He should thank him, Master Lehelsom." The master pulled back and asked what to thank him for. The unknown person replied that there were defective magic schemes. It was because of them that his plan failed completely. He abruptly appeared in front of Lehelsom and grabbed him by the face. The unknown lifted Lehelsom up and began pumping dark matter into him. Well, did he come across something so delicious? He likes it. The demon inside Lehelsom is growing at a fast rate. He also has an outstanding magical compatibility with mushrooms, and it is very much filled with negative emotions. It's just wonderful. The unknown man said that he wanted to give Lehelsom a gift, because it would be a sign of his gratitude. Suddenly, Lehelsom's body began to emit a huge amount of dark matter that seeped out of his wound. He continued that a new life awaits Lehelsom and he will be reborn. It's just amazing. He's glad he stayed here. Now it's time for him to run. After all, who knows? When that woman comes, good luck to Lehelsom and his new demonic life. Lehelsom woke up and felt the pain disappear from his right leg. People started running up to him and asking if he was okay. Lehelsom opened his eyes. Magic mushrooms began to appear from his body. People screamed. What happened is mushrooms. Lehalsam screamed shrilly. He turned into the demon Lehalsam. People looked at him with disgust. He looked around and did nothing. People shouted that it was a monster. No, it's definitely a demon, and it's taken on human form. It looks like he called the salmon that swooped down on them from the sky. Passers-by began to run away and shout for someone to kill the demon Lehalsam. Hurry up, he needs to be destroyed. Call the army, but it's a demon, so you need to call the knights. And where are the alchemists? It looks like only the students and those wounded are left. The demon Lehalsam was horrified why everyone was looking at him with such horror. Sweat started dripping from his face. People shouted that it was poison. They needed to run and let no one push. The demon Lehalsam said, "Wait," and held out his hand after them. Suddenly, a bullet flew into him and forced him to stop. He turned his head and saw that a man had shot at him. Lehalsam saw that a large number of knights were standing in front of him, who pointed pistols at him. The main knight shouted that the shooting was on his command. "Weapons are ready." The chief knight raised his hand and ordered the soldiers to load their weapons at the ready. He waved his hand and a huge fireball of bullets flew at Lehalsam, which riddled his body completely. He shouted for a subordinate to remove the magic weapon because they were not lied to. It was a demon. Neither the bullets nor the elements worked on it. There can be no doubt. He raised his hand vertically up and said that they were categorically short of people, especially for this. One of the knights said we would attack head-on, Captain Harold. Captain Harold said it wasn't that simple. The report says that the demon emits poison. Therefore, it is necessary that everyone change the magical elements. You need to shoot in one volley. The knights shouted that it was so. Shots rang out. Lehalsam tried to say something, but he couldn't, and he said incoherent words. He suddenly turned around and saw a window that reflected his reflection, showing him that he had become a demon. Lehalsam was very surprised by this and did not believe his reflection. Captain Harold shouted for all his subordinates to start shooting. Lehalsam growled and shouted that he was hot. Captain Harold noticed that the fire was not working. Was the demon resistant to fire? He shouted to stop shooting and draw his swords. And we need to attack him. The knights rushed at the demon. Suddenly, Lehalsam looked down. He noticed that he was standing under a manhole, so he turned into liquid and disappeared from the knight's sight. Captain Harold was shocked to think that the demon had really escaped into the sewers. The captain exclaims. Lehalsam made his way through the sewers and was able to escape from the knights as far as possible. At the same time, Karen shouted that they had suffered losses after the salmon attack, and that they would get about that much after selling the magic stones. She continued that she wanted to reward those who stood out in such a difficult time. She looked at her friends and called Ari and Roa. The girl said that they not only quickly assessed the strength of the enemy, but also passed this information on to the others in the near future. The girls nodded. Karen moved on to Linta. She said that he bravely fought the enemy. Thanks to him, civilians were not injured. After all, the people here are very frivolous, and Linta did not let them rush headlong at the enemy. He said that he was flattered by such beautiful words. Linta said that he had resigned, but he was glad that he could help. Karen continued and moved on to introducing Rust. The main character put his fist on his chest and said he was listening to her. She said he quickly prepared an attack that destroyed the salmon. His actions are commendable. Thanks to him, they were almost unharmed. After all, one right move and there would be trouble. Karen said she couldn't find the words to thank Rasta. She added that she was very glad that Rust had joined them. Rust said thank you for such praise. All the people began to applaud the hero Rust for his salvation. Everyone was happy. The main character happily looked at his friends. Everyone present gave him warm smiles. Rust thought that at that moment his heart felt better. He had already forgotten about Lehalsam's escape. All his worries were gone. Karen smiled and said that she had sent an official report to the Alchemists Association, which contained information about the Lehalsam attack. She continued that, as everyone saw, the salmon attacked the capital too. The association is probably going through hard times. Rust thought he wasn't going to come back, but he cares about his old lair. Karen said that she thinks there's confusion and vacillation in the capital now. They won't wait for instructions. Rust smiled and said that on the contrary, we need to take the opportunity to start selling their magic crystals. Karen smiled and replied that yes, we need to start selling them. and Rasta is waiting for a very large amount of further work on their production for sale.